Chapter 3600. It was a mess for no reason. Her embrace was very warm and made him yearn for it. He actually couldn't help but want to hug her back tightly. It was just that this warmth made him feel at a loss, lost and confused. Why did he rely on this warmth? She kept telling him how he used to be and how he used to be. But was there really a past? Yu suddenly felt a splitting headache. It was so painful, as if a pair of hands were tearing his head apart. Yu clutched his head in pain and his body curled up involuntarily. He was drenched in cold sweat. It was only at dawn that his headache eased a little. He wrapped himself in the blanket tiredly and fell asleep. When he woke up, it was already the afternoon of the next day. He slowly pushed open the door and saw Yunshushu sitting on the sofa in the living room. She was humming softly as she knitted a small glove. On the floor, Yueyao was sitting on the blanket, hugging a teething stick and chewing on it. When she heard footsteps coming out of the room, Yueyao looked up. She was the first to notice Yu. Seeing him standing at the door, she immediately got up from the floor with her butt sticking out. She gripped the teething stick tightly and walked towards him step by step. "Brother," she hobbled over to him. She loosened her grip and the teething stick fell to the floor. Yunshushu heard the sound of something falling. She looked up and looked at Yu. She put the glove aside and said, "Yu, you're awake." Yu didn't say a word. He only lowered his head and looked at Yueyao. Yueyao had a pair of big eyes just like him. They were very attractive. Especially those curly eyelashes. When she blinked, they fluttered like the wings of a butterfly and were very charming. Yueyao suddenly opened her arms. Her cherry lips opened and closed and she said in a soft and tender voice, "Brother, hug." This glutinous rice ball wanted brother to hug her. The little fellow was very forgetful. She had completely forgotten about Yu's indifference towards her when she was asking for a hug. Yunshushu froze for a moment and looked nervously at Yu. However, she saw that his attitude was no longer as cold as before. At least, when Yueyao walked towards him, he no longer dodged. "Big brother. Hug me." Yueyao stretched out her arms again and stood on her tiptoes. However, she lost her balance and fell on her butt. From start to finish, Yu looked at her coldly and did not help her up. Yueyao fell, but she did not cry in a delicate manner. She only furrowed her delicate brows, clearly aggrieved. She got up from the ground on all fours and raised her head to look at Yu, only to see that he was still cold and indifferent. For a moment, she was extremely sad. Her little mouth pouted high, and she looked like a storm was coming. Yunshushu knew from this that she was going to cry. She quickly stood up and was about to walk over to carry Yueyao when Yu suddenly bent down and gently carried Yueyao. He was still a little unfamiliar with the way he carried his sister. He didn't even know how to use his arms to support her, but Yueyao was delighted to see him carry her. She hugged him tightly like a koala bear and didn't want to let go. She leaned on his shoulder affectionately and broke into a smile. Chapter 3601. For some reason, Yueyao was inexplicably close to Yu. This surprised Yunshushu a little. After all, a child's memory was limited. Even before this, Yu was the closest to her and doted on her the most. She liked to hug her every day, hold her phone, and take pictures of Yueyao nonstop like an idiot. However, at that time, Yueyao was incomparably cold to Yu. However, Yu had left for more than a year. Yueyao shouldn't have remembered. Yueyao hugged Yu like a koala. Her little head rested on Yu's shoulder, looking extremely satisfied. Yunshushu teased her and said, "Yueyao, where's Xiao Yichen?" She thought that Yueyao had mistaken Yu for Xiao Yichen. When Yueyao finally started babbling, Xiao Yichen taught her to say her name. Yueyao also learned a skill, which was to recognize the names of all the family members, except for Yu. When Yunshushu asked, "Where's Xiao Yichen?" Yueyao would often point at Xiao Yichen and ask, "Where's Muyaja?" She could also recognize the direction and point at Muyaja. Yunshushu didn't specially teach her Yu's name. This name had become an unspeakable pain in her heart. Whether it was Mu Yaja or Gong Jia, they would avoid it as much as possible. Hence, Yue Yao didn't know Yu Yu's name. However, Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen looked very similar, so they might have been confused. Where's Xiao Yichen? When Yue Yao heard Yun Shishir say Xiao Yichen's name, he couldn't help but look around. However, he didn't see Xiao Yichen, so he asked hesitantly, where's Xiao Yichen? Yun Shishir was stunned. If Yue Yao mistook Yu Yu for Xiao Yichen, she would definitely point at Yu Yu. However, it did not. Yun Shishir would never have thought that after more than a year, Yue Yao actually remembered Yu Yu's appearance and could even differentiate Yu Yu from Xiao Yichen. When Yu Yu heard Yun Shishir's question, he asked suspiciously, who's Xiao Yichen? Yun Shishir said gently, Xiao Yichen is your older brother. You're twins and look exactly the same. No one can tell the difference. Other than your family members, I didn't expect Yue Yao to be able to differentiate between you and Xiao Yichen. After a pause, Yun Shishir said sadly, after all, when Yue Yao was not even a year old, you got into trouble. When Yu Yu heard this, his thoughts were a little confused. I have an older brother? Yu Yu looked a little surprised. Yun Shishir immediately took out a photo. It was a family photo and she showed it to Yu Yu. Yu Yu looked at the photo. It was a family photo. Yun Shishir was sitting with Yue Yao in her arms. Two children who looked exactly like him were standing on both sides. It was sunset. Of the two children, one had a gentle smile while the other had a sunny smile. Their eyebrows and eyes were exactly the same, except for a slight difference in height. Even he could not tell which child was his own. This was the first time he saw a family photo like this after he returned to the Mu family. At first glance, it was a huge shock. Yun Shishir had always said that he was her son and her baby. Yu Yu had always been suspicious. The reason why he was not so resistant and close to her now was not because he believed that he was her son. It was because he did not know why he was not so resistant and close to her. However, when he saw this photo, Yu Yu could not help but wonder if what she said was true. Was he really her family? Was that possible? Chapter 3602. Alice had instilled memories in him. He was the son of the Gong family and had always been in poor health, so he had been receiving physiotherapy on Ashland Island. He didn't know who his mother was, nor did he know who his siblings were. He only knew that he had an uncle called Gong Jia. However, even Gong Jia told him that his real name was not Mu Yaja. His real name was Yun Tianyu, and he was the son of Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir. He could not digest this information for a while. It was complete nonsense. He had been in the Gong family all this time and did not have any memories of Mu Yaja, Yun Shishir, and even Xiao Yichen. It was just that the photo made his thoughts chaotic for a moment. Yu Yu lowered his head to look at Yue Yao, who was in his arms. Yue Yao also looked up at him. Seeing him staring at him, the little guy reached out his soft hands and gently patted his face. It was so fun. Yu Yu did not find it annoying, though. Her scratches did not hurt much, and her nails were neatly trimmed. Hence, when she pinched herself, it did not hurt or itch. Yu Yu was no longer as resistant to this child as before. He avoided her as if she were a snake or a scorpion. This change made Yun Shishir feel relieved. Did he quickly improve on the day he regained his memories? During dinner, Yun Shishir personally cooked. When Gong Jia and Mu Yaja returned, the dishes were already on the table. What surprised them was not that Yun Shishir cooked for the first time, but that they saw Yu Yu sitting at the dining table with Yue Yao sitting on the baby stool and playing with a toy. He lazily propped his chin on his hand and quietly watched her play with the toy. This guy actually walked out of his room? This was a miracle. After returning to the Mu family for such a long time, he had always locked himself in his room. He never came out of his room, never letting the sun out. Why did he come out now? Gong Jia and Mu Yaja looked at each other but did not show too much of a shock, lest they startled him. As usual, they sat down at the dining table. Yu Yu did not look at them and continued to stare at Yue Yao. Gong Jia had his own thoughts. Yu Yu, this damn siscon. Why was he always staring at Yueyao? Was uncle not good-looking? Huh. After being back for so many days, this brat had only glanced at him lightly when he smashed the bowl of noodles that he had brought out. He had not even looked at him directly. Gong's heart. Muyaja and Gong Jia stared at Yu fiercely and complained in their hearts. The two of them were not as good-looking as Yueyao, right? Yun Shishir walked out with rice and saw that Gong Jia and Muyaja had returned. The two of them sat opposite Yu and the three of them formed a strange triangle. Her lips twitched as she placed the rice on the table. Let's eat. Yun Shishir placed the rice noodles in front of Yueyao and tied a napkin around her before sitting down beside her. They started eating. Yu was stunned and did not move his chopsticks. When they were on Ashland Island, he had always eaten alone. He was used to having a quiet dining table and had never experienced this before. There were so many people sitting around the table and eating, but he did not feel uncomfortable at all. What are you waiting for? Yun Shishir picked up a grilled chicken wing for him and said, eat it while it's hot. Yu picked up his chopsticks and started eating. Chapter 3603. Yu finally raised his eyes to look at him. It was just that this glance was cold and emotionless, and then, he pushed the vegetables away in disgust. He pushed them away. He had thought that he would just push them away, but unexpectedly, Yu picked up the vegetables and threw them into the small plate used for throwing the bones. Gong Jia's heart shattered with a smack. Muyaja muttered, Yu doesn't like vegetables. Hence, he also picked up a drumstick and put it in his bowl. Yu didn't even look at it. He used his chopsticks and placed the drumstick on the table. Then, he used his chopsticks to pick up the chicken wing that Yun Shishir had given him and started eating. Muyaja was speechless. Gong Jia tried to hold back his laughter until his stomach hurt. He lowered his voice and said, brother-in-law, he doesn't want to eat the drumstick you gave him. Yu just doesn't like you, haha. Muyaja turned around and smiled at him elegantly. Then, he picked up a piece of red braised pork and stuffed it into his mouth. Shut up and eat. Gong Jia couldn't speak with a piece of red braised pork stuffed into his mouth. He stared blankly at Muyaja as he calmly picked up his bowl and started eating. Yu finished the drumstick in his bowl and stopped eating. Yun Shishir saw this and picked up some vegetables for him. Yu hesitated for a while and ate the vegetables as well. Yueyao thought that it was fun. She suddenly scooped up some rice noodles with a spoon. She raised her little hand and stretched it in front of Yu, wanting to feed him. Yueyao wasn't very good at using the spoon. She held the spoon in a reverse grip and the rice noodles dripped onto the table. Yu looked at her in surprise, only to hear Yueyao mumble, okay. Eat. Duh. Yun Shishir said, Yueyao is feeding you. Yu was stunned for a few seconds. She stretched out her head and took the rice noodles that Yueyao handed her. The sticky rice noodles didn't have any extra seasoning. It was light, but there was a rich milky fragrance. Yu took a bite. When Yueyao saw this, he was extremely excited. He danced around and scooped up another bite. His little hand held the spoon with great effort and raised it to his mouth. Yu was a little conflicted. This rice noodle was not particularly delicious. It was a formula for babies, so it was tasteless. However, Yueyao insisted on feeding him. He didn't know if it was because he found it fun or something else. Yu had no choice but to take another bite. Yueyao turned his head and smiled at Yun Shishir as if he was presenting a treasure. He revealed his cute little front teeth and said, Mommy. Brother is eating. Yun Shishir smiled and coaxed, okay. Yueyao, eat too. No, I want to feed. Brother, as Yueyao spoke, she fed Yu mouthful by mouthful. After that, Yu was full just by eating the rice noodles. Yun Shishir was holding back her laughter. She was a little surprised that Yu didn't show any resistance to Yueyao's closeness. Even when Yueyao fed him, Yu didn't reject it. Opposite them, the two men who had been ignored from the start to the end were frowning. Gong Jia didn't believe it and picked up another wing root. Yu didn't even look at it and removed it. There was nothing to say. Gong Jia couldn't take it anymore and protested. What's the difference between the wing root I picked up and the one your mommy picked up? This was the love of an uncle. Yu said coldly, it's dirty. There's saliva. It's not hygienic. Gong Jia was puzzled. Didn't Yunshusher's chopsticks have saliva on them? Yueyao's spoon was full of saliva. Why didn't he dislike it? Chapter 3604. After dinner, Yu was about to go back to his room when Gong Jia suddenly put his arm around his shoulder and said, What are you doing in your room every day? Cultivating? Yu slapped his hand away and glared at him as if to warn him, Don't touch me. Why are you glaring at me? Gong Jia said confidently, I'm doing this for your own good. If you weren't my biological nephew, I wouldn't have anything to do with you lying in your room until your limbs degenerate. Yunshusher added, That's right, Yu. You can't stay in your room every day. You have to go out for a walk once in a while. When Muyaja heard this, he suddenly said to Yunshusher, Why don't we take him out for a walk? Who knows, it might be good for him to recover his memory. Yunshusher felt that this made sense. Gong Jia also said, I heard that there's an open-air music festival at Manha Square tonight. It starts at 8 p.m. Why don't we go to the music festival? Yunshusher agreed readily. Gong Jia was about to carry Yueyao when Yunshusher immediately said, Yueyao can't go. It's too noisy at an open-air music festival. Yueyao will cry. Then, what about Yueyao? Although there was a nanny, Yueyao couldn't be left alone. No one was assured. Muyaja said matter-of-factly, as his uncle, you should stay and take care of Yueyao. When Gong Jia heard this, he couldn't take it anymore. No way. Why should I? He hooked his arm around Muyaja's shoulder and said disdainfully, Don't think I don't know what you're thinking. You must be thinking of using the music festival to communicate with Yu. No way, I want to go too. What's wrong with the three of us communicating? Hey, are you being xenophobic? Gong Jia was not convinced and said, I also want to communicate with my nephew. Muyaja said coldly, Your surname is Gong, not Mu. You and I are not family. Gong Jia, Yunshusher added, Shao Jia, you can stay at home and take care of Yueyao. Muyaja continued, Well, you don't like Yueyao very much. Now, no one is fighting with you for a hug. Be good. After that, Muyaja picked up Yu and left with Yunshusher. Gong Jia was left standing alone in the living room, unable to express his bitterness. He didn't know if he should curse her or not. Was he being treated as a babysitter? Just as Gong Jia was about to explode, Yueyao suddenly walked to his side, squatted down, and secretly stuffed a toy into his trousers. Ha ha ha. Yueyao let out a string of bell-like laughter. She grabbed his trousers and tugged. Gong Jia lowered his head and saw that she was having fun playing with his trousers. His eyes couldn't help but soften. He immediately squatted down and pulled her into his arms. Yueyao, Uncle will accompany you at home, okay? Yueyao suddenly raised her chubby little paw and slapped his face. Gong Jia's face darkened. He grabbed her little paw and said, You're not allowed to hit Uncle's face. Yueyao slapped his face again. Gong Jia frowned unhappily. However, when he saw Yueyao's heartless smile, which made him want to dote on her, he suddenly gave in. He curved his lips and gently kissed her cheek. Yueyao, be good. Daddy and Mommy don't want you, but Uncle wants you. Yueyao suddenly pinched his cheek and pulled it until it was deformed. She was amused by his distorted handsome face and couldn't stop laughing. It was only half an hour's drive from Manha Square. Chapter 3605. Yu let her hug him obediently. He looked out of the window. The passing scenery seemed familiar. Was this the place where he used to live? Especially when they passed by the park and the bridge across the river. Yunshusher saw that he was staring at the bridge and immediately said, Yu, do you still remember? We used to set off fireworks here during the Lunar New Year. Fireworks? Yeah. Yunshusher continued, at that time, you were fighting to set off fireworks. I didn't let you do it in the past, so you felt that it was a novelty and wanted to light your own fireworks. I was a little scared. Yu stared at the bridge curiously. Through the window, he could see many people standing under the bridge, sitting on long benches or flying kites. The kites were luminous and many of them were bobbing in the wind. He couldn't help but be entranced by the sight. Muyaja steered the kite as he looked at Yu through the rearview mirror. His heart was filled with emotions. Yu had disappeared for a year and everyone was thinking about him. Although no one gave up easily, as time passed, the hope in their hearts gradually disappeared without a trace. However, no one dared to give up. Because if they gave up, it would mean that in their hearts, Yu was really dead. At that time, the search became their motivation to persevere. When Yu really came back, Muyaja didn't show it on his face, but in fact, he was ecstatic. His son was still alive. He had come back alive. However, as a father, he had to maintain his composure. Hence, he didn't show it on his face. However, his care and patience for Yu was no less than Yunshusher's. Even if Yu didn't acknowledge him and didn't remember him, it didn't matter. Yu would always be Muyaja's son. This was a fact that even the heavens couldn't change. Many people gathered in Manha Square. The weather was perfect for the open-air music festival. There was no rain. Everyone gathered in the square. At a glance, the square was filled with people. Among the crowd, there were people constantly waving their light sticks, forming a sea of stars. There were too many people, probably in the tens of thousands. With so many people, it was too dangerous. If there was any commotion, a stampede could easily occur. Yunshusher was a little worried. She had always had a lot of concerns. After all, women were more meticulous. Moreover, there were many reports on the news that said that in crowded places, if it wasn't a stampede, it was a crush, or it was a fall and bruise. With so many people around, it was inevitable. Therefore, she hugged Yu even tighter. Why are there so many people? Yunshusher muttered and looked around. They had arrived relatively early, but because they arrived early, the crowd had blocked the only exit. For a moment, they could not advance or retreat. People kept pushing and shoving, trying to get to the front, the closest place to the stage. There were too many people. If she had known that there would be so many people, Yunshusher wouldn't have come. However, since she was already here, she might as well make the best of it. Yunshusher hugged Yu. Even so, it was still difficult for Yu to see the stage. However, he wasn't interested. He didn't like places with too many people, and he didn't like places that were too noisy. It was irritating. It was tiring. Chapter 3606. Yunshusher, however, said, "No, it's too dangerous. There are so many people squeezing around. If you accidentally fall, you might hit your head." Muyaja felt that it made sense. Hence, he took Yu from Yunshusher's arms, worried that she would be too tired to carry him. Yu was initially a little resistant in his arms and struggled a little. Muyaja said to him, "You're so heavy. Mommy's arms will get tired if I carry you all the time. Let Daddy carry you for a while, okay?" When Yu heard this, he didn't show any signs of resistance. He just turned his face away and refused to look at him. Obviously, he didn't appreciate it. However, he didn't refuse or resist again. Muyaja was already satisfied. On the stage, the band went on stage one after another to perform the songs. The atmosphere was instantly ignited. Everyone waved the light sticks in their hands and immersed themselves in the moving music. Yu was tone-deaf and wasn't particularly interested in music. However, when the third song started playing, it was an English song that strangely captured his attention. Imanharakani Bodasi Mayam here. Can anyone see Mekanini body help? Can anyone help me? Imanhiri, a prisoner of history, I am here, a sinner of history, Kantio Heremical. Can you hear me yelling? Ariyuing to Jetmana, will you take me away immediately? I've been waiting for I've been waiting for you to rescue me. You must come and save me. Imanhiran calling out Beauty Akanthar, I am here. I'm shouting loudly, but no one can hear me. Can anybody help? Can anyone help me? I'm hysterical until I break down. I'm lost in the cage. Tell me there's still hope. Is there anyone outside listening? This was an English song. The meaning of the lyrics was about a lost person, trapped in the sad memories of the past, waiting to be redeemed and saved. However, this song actually made Yu feel an indescribable sadness in his heart. He gently closed his eyes. In the darkness, he could vaguely see a cage in the darkness where there was no light. A child who looked exactly like him was holding on to the cage tightly and shouting something. But he couldn't hear anything. He couldn't hear anything at all. In his ears, there was only the sound of music and the noise of people buzzing. The youth in the cage seemed to have seen him. He shook the iron bars and shouted crazily, "Let me out of here." Yu furrowed his brows and was a little puzzled. "Who are you? Let me out. I don't want to be here." The youth gripped the iron bars tightly and looked desperate. "I don't want to be here alone, don't lock me up here alone." Between the iron bars, the youth's delicate face was pale. "Mommy, Daddy, can you hear me? Mommy. Yu. A series of urgent calls finally woke him up. When he woke up again, he was in Muyaja's arms. He seemed to have fainted. Muyaja and Yunshusher were scared out of their wits. They kept patting his face until he finally woke up. However, when he opened his eyes, a line of tears suddenly fell from the corner of his eyes. Yunshusher was shocked to see his tears. Just as she was about to caress his face, she saw a helpless look on the child's face. "Mommy, Mommy," he called her anxiously and frowned slightly. Chapter 3607. Yunshusher was so excited and happy that he had taken the initiative to call her. For a moment, she was caught off guard. Just as she was about to hug him, the child in her arms suddenly pounced on her and hugged her tightly. His little hands hugged her tighter and tighter. "Mommy. Mommy. Yu missed you so much." Muyaja was also stunned. Yunshusher was also stunned. That familiar voice was enough to make her heart burn. Yunshusher hugged him even tighter in surprise. "Yu, you're back? Is that you?" Yu. Gong Jia had told her about Yu's situation. Yu had dual personalities. One was the son of light, and the other was the son of darkness. One side was pure and innocent, while the other side was evil and cruel. Gong Jia said that Yu's memory had been sealed, but his first personality had been killed by his second personality. Perhaps his memory could be recovered, but the innocent and kind Yu of the past might not be able to come back. When Yunshusher first heard about this, she was shocked and flustered. She didn't know anything about dual personalities, nor did she know anything about the dark side. Her Yu was so pure and innocent. How could he be so cruel? But after that, she kept reading up on all kinds of information about dissociative identity disorder and dual personalities. There had always been many conflicts in the field of dissociative identity disorder. After all, the research in this field wasn't very deep. There weren't many patients with dissociative identity disorder in the world. However, some said that the first personality wouldn't be taken over by the other personalities. Some said that not only would the first personality be killed and taken over, but once another personality took over the body, the person would never be able to come back. Yunshusher was also mentally prepared that Yu of the past would never be able to come back. Even though Yu had changed and had become cold and reclusive, she didn't dare to ask for more if he could come back alive. As long as Yu was safe and by her side, she would do her best to take good care of him. Even if the Yu of the past couldn't come back to her side, she didn't care. But in her heart, she still hoped for a miracle to happen. Even though this process might be more difficult than carrying a child for 10 months, she wasn't afraid. She also hoped that the Yu of the past could come back to her side. "Yu, are you back?" "Yunshusher, you." She was so excited that she hugged Yu tightly and burst out in tears. However, the crying of the child in her arms gradually stopped until it was dead silent and did not make a single sound. Yu, too, Yu, Of you. Why are you crying? Yu asked. Suddenly, he frowned and touched the corners of his eyes with his fingers. What he touched were the dried tears. Why, was he crying too? Yu frowned strangely and wiped the tears away. Yunshushu looked at him nervously and didn't move. She tried calling out to him carefully, Yu? Yu looked at her coldly. He didn't respond or reject her. Just like before, his face was cold and emotionless. Yunshushu's heart sank to the bottom of the abyss. Yu had disappeared again. Chapter 3608. How could this be? Yu, she thought that Yu was really back. She really thought that the gentle Yu from the past was back. But in the blink of an eye, he resumed his cold demeanor. How could this be? Yunshushu said anxiously, just now, it was Yu, she cried to Muyaja, her heart aching. Just now, I heard Yu calling me mommy. Muyaja hugged Yunshushu's shoulders and kissed her forehead. Shushu, don't be like this. Don't be anxious. Didn't we agree to take it slow? Yunshushu turned around and looked at the child in her arms. Suddenly, she pleaded, please. Let Yu come back, please. I want to see Yu, I want to see Yu. She didn't know what nonsense she was spouting. But her mind was in a mess. The only thing she could realize was that there seemed to be two souls residing in this child's body. One was the Yu from the past. The other was the Yu who had been given the name Gong Fan. She missed Yu. She wanted to see that Yu again and hear him call her mommy. She wanted that Yu to come back. All this while, she had been waiting patiently. But her hope had been dashed again. Her disappointed expression had undoubtedly agitated the child. The child looked at her coldly and finally said, I'm not Yu. Then let Yu come back, please. She lowered her posture to the lowest possible level and was practically begging him with an incomparably pleading tone. The child suddenly felt frustrated. Yu, hearing this name that didn't belong to him every day, his ears were about to grow calluses. So, this woman was being so gentle to him because she wanted to awaken that Yu? What she needed was Yu. Whether it was Yunshushu, Muyaja, or Yueyao, what they needed was Yu, not him. What was laughable was that he was actually moved by her gentleness. He actually instinctively yearned for this warmth and tenderness. Instinctively, he wanted to rely on her, wanted to hug her. However, from the beginning to the end, he was treated as another Yu. What she needed, what she loved, and what she missed, was never him. All this while, he had been needed, cared for, and loved. It was all because they wanted to find the shadow of Yu in him. It was as if this body had always belonged to Yu, and he had been treated as an invader, occupying this body as an enemy. He had never been needed. Or even rejected by them. Was he hated? Or rejected? He also wanted to try his best to adapt to the role of Yu. But he wasn't Yu. So, stop calling him Yu. The child was anxious and frustrated. He pushed her away forcefully. I've said it before. I'm not Yu. Yunshushu was pushed to the ground and her eyes were filled with shock. Muyaja also looked at him in disbelief. He didn't expect him to revert back to that cold and aloof self when he had just returned to the Mu family. The child was obviously losing control of his emotions. He stood up and his body swayed slightly. The child tried his best to stabilize himself and turned to look at Yunshushu. He said in disappointment and anger, "Don't call me that again. I'm not Yu, I'm not Yu." Chapter 3609. Yunshushu was heartbroken when she heard that. She immediately said, Yu, don't say such silly things. How are you not Yu? You are. You are. Enough. Yu covered his ears uncontrollably and said in despair, "Don't call me that again." After he said that, he turned around and his slender figure disappeared into the bustling crowd. Yu Yunshishir chased after him anxiously. However, it was too crowded. Yu was not tall and was very skinny. He managed to squeeze through the crowd. However, she was blocked by the crowd. What should we do? Muyaja held her hand and comforted her. Don't worry. He held her hand and followed the direction in which Yu had left. They pushed through the crowd and chased after him. Yu, the voices were still ringing in his ears. Yu closed his eyes tightly. His fragile body seemed to be on the verge of collapsing in the crowd. Don't call me that again, don't, he finally calmed down. However, when he looked around, he was surrounded by the crowd. On the stage, rock music was playing intensely. The crowd was also excited by the explosive rhythm. Some of them sang loudly along with the music. Some of them screamed hysterically. Yu felt a little dizzy. He felt that the noise was getting further and further away. All he could hear was the buzzing of the crowd. Excuse me. Someone rushed over and pushed through the crowd. When he saw Yu in front of him, he pushed him hard. Yu lost his balance and almost fell. There were so many people. If he fell, he would definitely be stepped on mercilessly by the crowd. Just as he was about to fall, an arm suddenly supported his center of gravity. Are you okay? A woman's gentle voice was heard. Yu frowned. He was a little surprised. Who was it? Was it her? Yunshishir? When he raised his head, he saw a woman's face that he didn't recognize. The woman in front of him was delicate and pretty. Her every movement gave off a heroic aura that ordinary women did not have. Yu narrowed his eyes and sized her up. You are, Chu-ho looked at the child in front of him. He suddenly felt that he looked familiar, but he could not remember where he had seen him before. Behind her, Gu Jinglian walked over with baby Chu in his arms. Lin Shi followed beside him and was puzzled to see Chu He grabbing a child's arm. Gu Jinglian's handsome face darkened when he saw the child's face clearly. It's you? Yu turned to look at the man, and his eyes instantly turned gloomy. Gu. When enemies met enemies, and Yu Gu Jinglian's face turned pale when he saw Yu. Chu-ho was surprised when he saw his expression. What's wrong? Do you know this child? The man snorted coldly and said in an unfriendly tone, I don't just know him. He also had a deep hatred. He still had a score to settle with this child. Yu took a step back cautiously. A tiger would be bullied by a dog. This was not Hurricane, and he was alone. He would not gain anything if he went head-to-head with Gu Jinglian. Just as he was about to leave, Gu Jinglian grabbed him by the collar and lifted him up. Why are you running? Chapter 36:10. He's just a child. You, child? Gu Jinglian sneered. He's not an ordinary child. He turned his head and fixed his gaze on Yu's face. His eyes were cold. He's from the Gong family, Gong Fan from the Hurricane group. He's not an ordinary child. Gong Fan. Hearing this name, Chu-ho's face also showed a surprised expression. Gong Fan, that was the child who had used her and Xiao Bao as a hostage to force Gu Jinglian to sign the agreement to cede Worth to him? How could he be so young? She looked so soft and squishy. She couldn't tell how vicious and merciless this child was. Yu was very calm. He narrowed his eyes and said calmly, Gu Jinglian, I dare you to touch me. Before he could finish speaking, Gu Jinglian flicked his finger hard on the man's forehead with a loud and crisp sound. Yu felt a concussion in his head and felt dizzy for a moment. He felt that his forehead was about to be shattered by this flick of his finger. Gu Jinglian said coldly, This is my territory in Beijing. You asked me if I dare to touch you. What do you think? Yu was not afraid at all. He raised his leg and kicked him in his weakest spot. This move was ruthless, but Gu Jinglian had expected it and dodged in time. This child was really ruthless. Was this kick going to end his lineage? Gu Jinglian would not let him off so easily. He kicked him in the butt. Yu, who had nowhere to hide, took the full brunt of the kick. He frowned in pain, but he did not show it on his face and maintained his composure. Gu Jinglian. You. Before he could finish, Gu Jinglian pinched his face and pulled hard. Rumor has it that the ruthless successor of the Hurricane Group, Gong Fan, is just a so-so without those mercenaries and bodyguards. However, this little guy was weak, yet he was still so arrogant. Who was he trying to show off to? Showing off in his territory, was he courting death? In a hotel room next to the square, a gray-haired middle-aged man sat on the windowsill with a bottle of wine in his hand. He was drunk and on the verge of collapsing. If it weren't for the guardrails outside the windows of the room, he would have lost his balance and fallen. He picked up the wine bottle and took a big gulp. When he opened his eyes again, there was a terrifying murderous intent in them. In the square, the crowd was bustling with noise. The crowd danced to the music, getting high. However, the livelier the crowd was, the more the man felt indignant. Just last month, he was fired by the company. Half of his life, he worked hard for the company, but all he got in return was a letter of dismissal. He lost his job, and his wife left him with their child. Just a few days ago, he saw his wife walking on the street with another strange man. They looked so sweet. Only then did he suspect that his wife had betrayed him. For so many years, he had suffered untold hardships. In order to support his family, he had been constantly on the move every day. In order to support his family, he had almost exhausted all his energy. In the end, what did he get in return? In exchange, he was chased away by the company and betrayed by his wife. Even his son refused to meet him. He had wanted to visit him several times, but his son avoided him. He even said that he would never acknowledge him as his father. What did he do wrong? Chapter 36:11. He looked down at the crowd in the square. Every single one of them was so happy. He then looked at himself. He was like an orphan who was abandoned by the world. Why did the world only give him endless despair when the others were so happy? The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was unfair. Since the world had abandoned him, then don't blame him for taking revenge on the world. The man finished his glass of white wine in one gulp and took out an AK-47 from under the windowsill. He swayed as he crouched beside the windowsill. He held the gun and loaded it clumsily. Then, he aimed the gun at the crowd and slowly pulled the trigger. He was already drunk. However, he did not need to aim in front of so many people. Every single one of them was worth it. Even if he died, he would not have lived in vain with so many people accompanying him to the grave. Suddenly, the man laughed arrogantly. Da-da-da-da, he pulled the trigger and fired wildly at the crowd. In the square, Gu Jinglian suddenly heard gunshots. He looked towards the direction of the sound. The square was too big, and the music on the stage was still loud. Therefore, he could not tell where the gunshots came from. Gunshots? Why were there gunshots? He could not have heard wrongly. Those were gunshots. Chu Ho also heard the gunshots that were almost drowned out by the noise. Based on the sound, it should be an AK-47. Someone was shooting at the crowd. Some of the people in the square suddenly screamed in fear. However, these screams were drowned out by the cheering crowd. The singer on the stage still did not realize what was going on. He was still sweating profusely as he held the microphone and performed with all his might. Most of the people in the crowd did not realize that the Grim Reaper was quietly approaching. Therefore, everyone was immersed in the music. The sound manipulator also realized that something was wrong. He received a radio message saying that someone was shooting at the crowd and asked for the music to be stopped immediately. The sound manipulator immediately stopped the music. The staff went on stage and covered the singer as he left the stage. The music suddenly stopped. Da-da-da. Gunshots were heard not far away. It was very obvious. It's gunshots. What's going on? Ah. Run. It's a terrorist attack. Someone is shooting at the crowd. Run. Some people were hit by bullets. Some bullets pierced through their heads, some pierced through their shoulders, and some pierced through their chests. For a moment, the huge square was shrouded in blood and darkness. Seeing that their companions were injured, many people were so frightened that they screamed and cried. Help! Someone's injured, call an ambulance. However, at this time, most people were focused on running for their lives. How could they care about others? The crowd frantically rushed towards the exit. Many people who were shot and fell to the ground were once again trampled by the frenzied crowd. Some who were still breathing were directly trampled to death. Some were running for their lives, while others were crying. For a moment, the scene was chaotic. Yu Yu's eyes flashed with astonishment when he heard the gunshot, too. Someone opened fire? Chu Ho turned to look at Gu Jinglian. Get out of here. She immediately crouched down and carried Yu Yu. Gu Jinglian carried Xiao Bao and held Lin Shi's hand as they ran towards the exit of the square. Crouch down. Gu Jinglian ordered Chu Ho. Chapter 36:12. At this moment, Yu Yu suddenly thought of Yun Shishir. She and Mu Yaja were still at the square. No. They were in danger. Yu Yu started to struggle. Let go of me. Gu Jinglian said angrily, are you crazy? Do you want to die? Let go of me. Yu Yu said to Chu Ho, I want to go back. Chu Ho did not allow him to struggle and hugged him even tighter. It's too dangerous to go back. Quickly leave this place. Yu Yu said coldly, I don't need you to care about me. Let go of me. Let go. Impossible. Chu Ho had a strong sense of justice. No matter what, Yu Yu was just a child. She could not leave a child in such a dangerous place. Yu Yu grabbed her collar tightly. I said, let go of me. You don't have to be responsible for my life or death. As he said that, he kicked Chu Ho hard. Chu Ho felt the pain and almost fell down. This was a rare opportunity. Yu Yu broke free from her grip and ran towards the crowd after regaining his senses. Chu Ho turned around in shock. She could not believe it. Usually, a child in this situation, like Xiao Bao, would have panicked and run away. He would be so scared that he would hide in an adult's arms and tremble in fear. Even someone as calm as Lin Shi would obediently hold Gu Jinglian's hand and go with the flow. However, this child insisted on walking into the crowd. Did he not know that the gunman was lying in ambush in some corner and was shooting randomly at the crowd? The more people there were, the more dangerous it was. There was a possibility of being shot at any time. Moreover, bullets did not have eyes. No one knew how many bullets the shooter had in his hands. In such a big square, there were so many people. Everyone was a live target. It was obvious that this was a terrorist attack. There was no premeditated plan or target. It was purely for venting and revenge. Going back would be suicide. Gu Jinglian said coldly, don't bother about him. No one could stop a person who wanted to die. When he returned to the crowd, Yu Yu scanned the crowd with his eyes. However, his height was limited. Just maintaining the center of the crowd and not being knocked down by the people running away in a panic was already exhausting. He looked around anxiously as he avoided the crowd. Just as he was about to shout, Mom, his voice stopped abruptly. In his subjective consciousness, he was unwilling to be called this name. But now, if he didn't call them that, how would he find them and meet up with them? Where are they? Are they still in the square? No way. They must be looking for him everywhere. They must still be here. Yu Yu couldn't care less anymore. She shouted at the top of her lungs, Mommy. Daddy. Where are you? He was like a small boat, desperately going against the flow of people, running towards the center of the square. Mommy. Daddy. He turned around and searched every face. Suddenly, he saw a familiar figure. He rushed forward and grabbed the hem of that person's shirt. Mommy. The woman turned around, but her face was covered in blood. She pushed his hand away almost instantly and ran towards the exit, following the flow of people. It wasn't her. Then where could she be? Yu Yu was even more flustered. He continued to go against the flow of people. Mommy. Mommy. Gradually, his voice sounded like he was about to cry. He looked around helplessly. The lights on the stage were off. The square was plunged into a deathly silence. Chapter 36:13. Mommy, Yu Yu kept searching in the crowd. He did not dare to look in one direction as he was afraid that he would miss something. However, just as he was looking deeper into the crowd, he heard gunshots. Not far away, the gunmen were still hiding in the dark and kept shooting at the crowd. Swoosh! Yu Yu felt the bullet graze his hair. In the next second, an endless amount of hot blood suddenly splashed onto his face. The bullet mercilessly pierced the neck of a woman beside him. The woman fell to the ground. Yu Yu was standing beside her. His warm body pressed her under him. Yu Yu was shocked. He felt the world spinning around him. He could only feel a heavy body pressing on top of him. He tried to push her away, but the woman's body gradually turned cold. When he pushed her, her head flipped over, revealing a pair of empty and withered eyes. Because it was too sudden, she was hit all of a sudden. She even maintained a panicked expression on her face as she fled. There was no sign of life. Her face was as white as a sheet of paper. Her dark eyes were like an endless abyss that could swallow him up at any time. There was a bloody hole on her neck. The bullet had penetrated her neck and there was an explosive wound. The hot blood kept flowing on his body. It was sticky, warm, and smelled fishy. Yu Yu was so scared that he could not speak. It was not that he had never seen a dead person, but he had never been so close to a corpse. He could even see from the woman's eyes how helpless, hesitant, perplexed, and uneasy she was before she died. Yu Yu struggled for a while, but due to the difference in strength, he could not push the corpse away. He was gradually out of breath. Mommy, he was extremely anxious. He was worried that Yun Shishir and Mu Yaja would meet with mishap during this time. He did not know how long the shooting would last. He also did not know how many bullets the killer hiding in the dark had. He only knew that the crowd in the square retreated like locusts and stepped on his hand from time to time. Yu Yu curled up into a ball and used all his strength to push the corpse away. He stood up shakily. Yu Yu suddenly could not hear anything in the midst of such a chaotic crowd. It was as if the line of death was stretched out in his ears. Beep, beep, he turned around and looked around again. He looked at every face that was filled with fear and uneasiness. From time to time, someone would fall and never stand up again. It was like purgatory on earth. He did not know why, but there was an inexplicable sense of guilt in his heart. She was dead, she was killed by a gunshot. Yu Yu lowered his head to look at his hands. Clenching them tightly, he dashed into the crowd again. Mommy. Yu Yu. Amidst the clamor, he suddenly heard a familiar voice. It was hysterical and almost cracked. It was her. It was Yun Shishir. Yu Yu was agitated. He could no longer care about his demeanor. He pushed through the crowd and shouted loudly, Mommy. Where are you? His voice was drowned out again. Perhaps his voice did not reach her ears at all. However, at least he could be sure that she was still in the square, still in the crowd. Why was she still here? Chapter 36:14. No way, she must be looking for him. He had to find her as soon as possible and get her out of here. Yu Yu shouted at the top of his lungs, Mommy. Mommy. I'm here. In the crowd, Yun Shishir and Mu Yaja were like headless flies, searching for Yu Yu's voice. Vaguely, they heard a child shouting at the top of his lungs. Yun Shishir immediately stopped and listened carefully. Finally, she recognized that it was Yu Yu's voice. She turned around and grabbed Mu Yaja's hand excitedly. She asked, Did you hear that? Mu Yaja nodded. Yeah, I heard it. I feel that Yu Yu is nearby. He's still at the square. Yun Shishir was extremely touched. He's looking for us too. Muyaja tried to identify the voice again and pointed in a direction. The voice is coming from there. Hurry. We have to find him quickly. It's too dangerous. Okay. The two of them kept moving through the crowd with their fingers interlocked. Yun Shishir kept calling Yu Yu's name. Yu Yu, Mommy is here. At the same time, Yu Yu followed the direction of Yun Shishir's voice. In the crowd, Muyaja used his height advantage and finally saw Yu Yu. He immediately squeezed through the crowd and rushed towards Yu Yu. Yun Shishir also saw him. She chased after him and hugged Yu Yu tightly. Yu Yu didn't see her, and before he could react, Yun Shishir hugged him tightly. He looked up and saw that it was Yun Shishir and Muyaja. The huge rock in his heart was finally lifted. You're okay. Yun Shishir cried tears of joy. She hugged him with lingering fear. The embrace of surviving a disaster made her arms tremble. Just now, when the gunshot sounded, she immediately realized that there was danger. Muyaja said that someone had attacked the crowd. According to the direction of the gunshots, they vaguely came from the direction of the hotel. He guessed that someone was probably hiding in the hotel room, shooting at the crowd with a machine gun or an AK-47. Yun Shishir and Muyaja were worried that something might have happened to Yu Yu, so they kept looking in the direction where Yu Yu had run. Along the way, Yun Shishir was extremely worried. Now, the scene was chaotic. The crowd was rushing toward the exit, and gunshots were constantly heard. Among the panicked crowd, people could be seen falling to the ground and being trampled on until they spat out blood. It was not hard to see that in the midst of the pushing and shoving, some people had fallen in front of the railing, and their shoulders had been pierced by the sharp railing. It was too scary. When Yun Shishir thought that Yu Yu might have been in such danger, she was anxious. Thank goodness. Thank God. Yu Yu was fine. Yun Shishir hugged Yu Yu tightly. At this moment, gunshots were heard again. She screamed in fear and covered Yu Yu as they lay on the ground. Muyaja also used his body to protect the mother and son. Looking around, he saw that the crowd was retreating. This meant that the density of the crowd was decreasing, and the possibility of them being exposed to the killers was increasing. They were in danger of being shot at any time. When the gunshots stopped, Muyaja held Yun Shishir's arm and said, "We can't stay here for long. Let's go." As he said that, he helped the mother and son up and ran in the direction of the crowd. Chapter 36:15. He was very tall. Even if a bullet was fired at him, he would be the first to be hit. Yun Shishir and Yu Yu would definitely be safe. It was almost instinctive for him to want to protect them from harm. Yun Shishir was in a panic and did not notice Muyaja's special position. Yu Yu, on the other hand, was very sensitive and noticed it immediately. Muyaja was protecting them. Yu Yu suddenly felt a strange feeling in her heart. Touched. Guilty. Mixed feelings. Let's go this way. Muyaja pulled Yun Shishir's arm while Yun Shishir protected Yu Yu. The three of them ran towards the crowd. The police sirens were heard. The police cars and ambulances were alerted and rushed over. On the other side of the square, there was a big crowd on the street facing the road. Everyone had scattered here and left the square. This was a temporary safe zone. Yu Yu saw many people either kneeling on the ground or lying on the ground. They were hugging their heads and crying. Many of them were injured. Although the injuries were not fatal, they had lost a lot of blood. Some of them were out of danger and immediately called their family and friends to tell them that they were safe. Some of them were crying as they talked on the phone. They had not recovered from the shock of surviving a disaster. Some couples were hugging each other. Some were hugging their injured friends and crying in fear. "Help, there are injured people here. Where's the doctor? Where's the nurse? Quick, save me." There were many children in the crowd. They were so frightened by this sudden incident that they started crying. The parents kept comforting and hugging them. Yun Shishir held Yu Yu's hand and ran all the way here. She was exhausted. After making sure that they had arrived safely, she was so frightened that she fell to the ground. She did not have the energy to say another word. Mu Yaja also knelt on the ground. Yu Yu looked at him and was shocked by the blood on his shoulder. Yu Yu stared straight at him. She pointed at his shoulder and said, Your shoulder is covered in blood. When Yun Shishir heard this, she turned around and looked at Mu Yaja. She was frightened by the blood-stained sleeve on his shoulder. She threw herself at him, looking helplessly at the blood-stained sleeve on his shoulder. She asked anxiously, What happened? I'm fine. Don't worry. I was probably grazed by a bullet. Earlier, when he was running all the way here, he didn't realize that he was injured. He only knew that he had to leave this dangerous area as soon as possible, so he didn't realize that he was injured. Yun Shishir did not know what to do, but Yu Yu was the first to run over. He gently pushed Yun Shishir away and said to Mu Yaja, Sit down. He was too tall. He couldn't move. Mu Yaja disagreed. Don't worry. Sit down. Mu Yaja had no choice but to sit down. Yu Yu pinched the ends of his sleeve and tore it open forcefully. He heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the wound. He thought that he had been hit by a bullet. He looked at the wound. It was only grazed by a bullet and there was a lot of blood. He cleaned the wound a little, tore a piece of cloth from his shirt, and simply bandaged the wound. He pressed on it to stop the bleeding. Yun Shishir was stunned. Yu Yu knew why she was surprised. He explained, I've learned some basic bandaging and bleeding control. These were not difficult. If he was injured at a critical moment, the most important thing was to stop the bleeding. This was what Lisa had taught him. These were the most basic first aid techniques. Chapter 36:16. At first, he was not willing to learn, but Lisa forced him to learn. After all, he often went to war zones. If there was an accident, she could not be by his side to protect him. If he was injured, basic bleeding control could save his life. Mu Yaja saw Yun Shishir's worried expression and immediately comforted her. Don't worry, it's just a simple scratch. It's nothing serious. It's good that you're okay. Yun Shishir sat in front of him, still in a state of shock. She wiped away her tears and heaved a sigh of relief as she finally calmed down. The police arrived quickly. With the clues provided, they immediately sneaked into the hotel and checked the rooms one by one. Finally, the attacker in a room on the 15th floor was killed on the spot. When they entered the room, everyone was shocked. The room had become an armory. There were AK-47s, machine guns, pistols, and even grenades that were not thrown out in time. It was hard to imagine how terrifying the situation would be if grenades were thrown into such a dense crowd. At that time, the number of casualties would probably increase by several times. The specific reason for the attack would have to wait until the case was filed for investigation. However, this was probably the most violent social terrorist incident in a long time. In the huge square, there were countless casualties. Preliminary estimates put the number of casualties in the hundreds. In the past, there had never been such a bad public security incident. The law in the country strictly controlled firearms. It was illegal to carry a gun. Ordinary criminals did not have such channels to get their hands on guns. This attack had never happened before. Yun Shishir called Gong Jia. Gong Jia handed Yue out to the nanny and drove over. However, the square was heavily congested with traffic. All the vehicles had to make way for the police cars and ambulances. There were more than 10 ambulances that were constantly transporting the injured. Cries, sobs, and screams were still incessant. Yun Shishir looked at the square through the railing. From afar, she could see that the ground was in a mess. Many light sticks were scattered on the ground, drink bottles, cans, and many corpses were scattered on the ground, as well as the wailing injured. It was hard to imagine that not long ago, this place was peaceful. Music, beer, light sticks, cheers, and screams. Now, it had become hell on earth. Hundreds of corpses were piled on the ground, and blood flowed like a river. Yun Shishir had never seen such a scene before. She still felt that this was a complete nightmare. The scene was cordoned off and maintained. Yu also stared blankly, unable to react for a long time. This accident, without the need for an official announcement, had already been defined as a bad shooting. How could this be? How could this be? The tragic cries still echoed in his ears. For the first time in her life, Yu felt that weapons could bring about such a terrifying hell. They were considered lucky. If they weren't lucky enough, it would be him, or mommy, or Muyaja. Perhaps it was one of the corpses in the square. For the first time in his life, he hated guns. This was something that could only bring death. In her mind, she suddenly recalled the words he had said in the past. I want all the wars in this world to end because of me, and to be born because of me. But, what was before them was war. However, after experiencing death for themselves, perhaps only then did they realize how terrifying death and war were. Chapter 36:17. Gong Jie finally arrived at the scene. When Yun Shishir saw him, she walked over and said to Gong Jie, Shao Jie, your brother-in-law is injured. Hurry up and send him to the hospital. What's going on? Gong Jie did not know what had happened. When he arrived, he saw Yu standing alone at the side, looking at the cordoned-off square. Her back view looked lonely and bleak. Yun Shishir was guarding Muyaja. Not long ago, someone was shooting at the square with a gun. There were many casualties. Gong Jie questioned, where's the ambulance? I saw many ambulances coming here. Yun Shishir shook her head and said, there are too many injured people. Those who are seriously injured take priority. Muyaja was only grazed, so the ambulance only bandaged him. Yun Shishir was extremely anxious. Even though Muyaja kept comforting her, saying that it was just a small injury and that it was not a big deal. But she was very anxious. Gong Jie checked Muyaja's injury. It was indeed a small injury. Once the bleeding stopped, it would not be a big deal. A graze from a bullet would not leave any scars. He also said, Shishir, don't worry too much. I've taken a look. It's really a small injury. Seeing that Gong Jie also said so, Yun Shishir was relieved. When Muyaja said that it was a small injury, she thought that he was afraid that she would be worried and comforted her, so he said that. Gong Jie understood the situation and was a little surprised when he found out what had just happened. The security in Beijing is very good. Why would there be a shooting incident for no reason? Yun Shishir was also confused. Yu suddenly turned around and said coldly, it's probably to take revenge on society. When Gong Jie heard this, he did not say much. He only said, get in the car. Even if it's just a minor injury, it still needs to be treated as soon as possible. Muyaja nodded and stood up. He said to Gong Jie, don't go to the big hospital in the city center. There are a lot of injured people there. With this wound, any hospital will do. All right. The three of them got into the car, and Gong Jie drove them to a relatively remote area. They randomly found a medium-sized hospital. The way in was very congested, but the way out was much wider. The ambulance prioritized sending the injured to the nearest hospital. Therefore, the few big hospitals near the city center were all overcrowded. In comparison, although this hospital was a little out of the way, it was fortunate that there were not many people. Soon, the queue was filled. While Muyaja was treating his wounds, Yu bumped into Gu Jinglian again in the corridor. Who would have thought that the two of them would be so fated to be admitted to the same hospital? Gu Jinglian was not injured. The one who was injured was Lin Shi. When he was leaving with the crowd, he got a small cut on his arm by a fallen railing. He needed a few stitches. When the two of them met again, Gu Jinglian did not expect that Yu would be safe and sound. When he saw Yu running against the crowd to the center of the square, he thought that he must have been killed. Even if he could dodge the bullets, he would not be able to dodge the crowd. He was afraid that he would suddenly fall and be trampled by the crowd. There were so many injured people. Some of them were shot by the bullets, while most of them were trampled by the crowd when they fell. Some of them were not injured, but many of them were trampled to death when they fell in the crowd. When Gu Jinglian saw Yun Shishir sitting behind Yu, he immediately understood why he was in such a hurry to come back. He was looking for someone. Chapter 36:18. He did not expect the cold and heartless child to have such a soft side. Gu Jinglian was a little surprised. When Yu saw Gu Jinglian, he lowered his head and did not say anything. Gu Jinglian crossed his arms. "Why, don't you recognize me?" When Yun Shishir heard the voice, she looked up and saw Gu Jinglian. Her eyes widened in surprise. She recognized him. Gu Jinglian, the head of the Gu family in Beijing. He was also Gu Xing's elder brother. Why was he here? Yu suddenly stood up and walked in front of him. He said coldly, "If there's anything, don't talk about it here." With that said, he tugged at his sleeve and led him to a corner. When he turned around, Yu's gaze was filled with hostility. "Gu Jinglian, what exactly is it that you're haunting me like a ghost?" Gu Jinglian crossed his arms in front of his chest calmly. "What do I have to do with you, Gong Fan? We haven't settled the score between us yet." "What score?" "The matter in North Africa is not something that can be forgotten so easily." Gu Jinglian said expressionlessly, "Werther is the core of the Gu family in North Africa. You used those despicable methods to take it away from me. How are we going to settle this score?" "Despicable?" Yu did not think much of it. He said faintly, "Gu Jinglian, don't make yourself sound so noble. I don't need to mention how you got that piece of land in Werther, right? That piece of land in Werther used to belong to Hurricane. In order to get that piece of land, the Gu family did not necessarily use honorable methods. Now, he was saying that he was despicable. So what? He only looked at the results and did not ask about the process. Gu Jinglian sized him up silently. Suddenly, he squatted in front of him and said slowly, "I have to say, you're really impressive to have such skills at such a young age. However, I did lose the matter in North Africa. I have no objections. However, I hope that you won't go against me in the future." He paused for a moment and said with some difficulty, "After all, you're just a child. If I'm too harsh on you, I'll be going too far." The boy's lips curled into a smile when he heard that. "I also hope that you won't go against me. Otherwise, I will also feel very embarrassed to have you suffer so much." The two of them had similar auras, so it was difficult to determine who was superior. Gu Jinglian's thin lips twitched slightly. The capital city had always been a place of strife, and there had never been a lack of open and veiled struggles. However, since Mu Yaja married Yun Shishir, withdrew from the strife, and focused on his family, the Xingyu Financial Group's aggressive expansion had also been restrained a little. Without such a strong opponent, Gu Jinglian could not help but feel bored. Still, with a powerful up-and-coming talent like Yun Tianyu around, it would not be too boring for her. Gu Jinglian stood up, touched his head provocatively, and turned to leave. Yu watched his back coldly and returned to Yun Shishir's side. At this time, Mu Yaja's wound had been treated. Seeing him appear out of nowhere, he asked suspiciously, "Where did you go just now?" Yu turned his face away and did not say a word. It was as if he had returned to the day when he had just returned to the Mu family and locked himself in his own world, as if he was isolated from the world. Mu Yaja was stunned, but he smiled. He understood his son's character. He was arrogant, sharp-tongued, and insincere. Chapter 36:19. He heard Yu calling him Daddy. He heard Yu calling him Daddy. His heart was burning with anxiety. That was enough. At least it proved that his Yu had never left. Mu Yaja suddenly hugged Yu from behind and lifted him up. Yun Shishir saw this and couldn't help but say angrily, "You're injured and you're still so restless." However, Mu Yaja said, "It's nothing. It's just a small injury." He bent down and gently kissed Yu's forehead. Yu's face instantly heated up. He turned his face away awkwardly to avoid him. With an unnatural expression, he said, "What are you doing?" carrying my son. Muyaja saw that Yu Yu was blushing adorably. He lowered his voice and whispered in his ear, "Just now at the square, you were so anxious to call me daddy. Now you're acting as if you don't care. You're still the same as before, saying one thing and meaning another." Yu Yu looked even more uncomfortable. He struggled and said, "Let go of me." As he struggled slightly, Muyaja's face showed a hint of pain. "Ouch, it hurts." Yu Yu was nervous for a moment. He thought that his struggle had affected his wound. For a moment, he didn't dare to move. Muyaja saw this and snickered in his heart. Beside him, Yun Shishir and Gong Jia looked at each other and snickered in their hearts. This proved that Yu Yu was still the same as before. Although he was awkward, he still knew how to care for others. On the island, the sea breeze danced. Mu Yichen suddenly woke up from his nightmare. Outside the window, the sun was already shining brightly. It was a dream. He held his forehead with a headache. When he woke up just now, he had completely forgotten the contents of his dream. He only knew that in his dream, he seemed to be very sad and upset. He seemed to have dreamt of Yu Yu. Yu Yu, half a month had passed since she swapped identities with Yu Yu. However, he was still not used to everything on the island. Boredom, loneliness, solitude, desolation. Sometimes, when Lisa was around, there was a companion. Although Lisa wasn't good with words and didn't like to talk, she didn't dare to start a conversation with Xiao Yichen. She always acted indifferent. However, regardless of whether she liked to talk or not, at least she had someone to keep her company. When Lisa was not around, Xiao Yichen had developed the ability to communicate with objects. Sometimes, he would talk to himself while walking. Ask and answer questions to yourself. If he didn't do that, he wouldn't know how to prove that he was still alive. Apart from breathing, thinking, and talking, Xiao Yichen felt like he was about to go crazy from boredom on this island. Lisa secretly gave him a tablet. With the tablet, when Xiao Yichen was bored, he would play games on the tablet to pass the time. He downloaded a pet training game called Pet Manor. In the game, he could adopt pets, build a pet manor, raise pets, and even talk to them. After training, the pets could even understand his commands and respond accordingly. He had a French bulldog named Yu Yu and a ragdoll cat named Lisa. One day, Xiao Yichen held the tablet and talked to Yu Yu. "Lie down." On the screen, the cream-colored French bulldog lay down obediently. It stuck out its tongue and tilted its head to look at him. Xiao Yichen rubbed its round head and barked again, "Yu Yu." The bulldog barked in joy. Woof. Chapter 36:20. The bulldog barked in joy. Woof. What's 1 plus 1? The bulldog hesitated for a few seconds and barked a few times. Xiao Yichen continued, "What's 3 plus 9 to 4 plus 15 to 80 plus 2? The bulldog was stunned and looked at him in confusion. Xiao Yichen was amused and laughed out loud. "Look, you don't even know how to add and subtract such simple numbers. You always say that I'm an idiot, but I think you're the idiot. Idiot Yu Yu." The bulldog understood the word idiot and lay on the ground weakly, revealing an innocent and pitiful expression. The ragdoll cat, Lisa, walked past Yu Yu gracefully and curled up into a ball in the cat bed. Xiao Yichen said again, "Lisa, come here." The ragdoll cat licked her paws and turned her head lazily to look at him. However, she seemed indifferent and ignored him. Xiao Yichen said unhappily, "Lisa, come here. Be good and listen to me." Only then did the ragdoll walk gracefully to the screen and sit beside Yu Yu, with a noble and inviolable look on her face. Xiao Yichen said, "Lie down." Meow. Lisa meowed lazily but did not move. In this game, cats were the hardest to tame. Cats were arrogant, cold, clingy, indifferent, affectionate, and distant. They were especially hard to tame. So far, Xiao Yichen had only learned one trick. Scratch him. Upon hearing this, Lisa turned around and swiped her claws at Yu Yu. She was shockingly fierce. Ha ha ha. Xiao Yichen was amused by this scene and laughed until he was rocking back and forth. When he looked up, he saw the real Lisa's cold face. Xiao Yichen was scared out of his wits. He froze and did not dare to move. Lisa put the tablet on the table and asked in a neutral tone, "Is it fun?" "It's okay." He scratched his face. "Yeah, it's just to pass the time." "Is this game very fun?" Xiao Yichen said awkwardly, "It's okay, I guess." Lisa glanced at him expressionlessly and her gaze fell on the screen. That noble ragdoll cat. At least he knew what was good for him. She was set to be a ragdoll cat. If she was set to be a dog, she would scratch him. Xiao Yichen complained, "It's so boring to be alone in the castle. There's no one to play with me." "Are you still a 3-year-old child? Do you still need someone to play with you?" "Although I'm not a 3-year-old, I'm still a kid." Xiao Yichen tugged at Lisa's sleeve and begged, "Lisa, play with me, okay? Let's go pick up seashells and make wind chimes. Gong Xiaoying will be here tomorrow," Lisa suddenly said. Xiao Yichen's expression froze. He stared at Lisa in astonishment and said suspiciously, "Didn't you say that Gong Xiaoying usually doesn't come here?" "That's under normal circumstances." Lisa continued, "You haven't left the island for a long time and there hasn't been any news from you. Of course, Gong Xiaoying will come and check on you. You have to remember that no matter what, you can't give yourself away when Gong Xiaoying comes tomorrow." "What will happen if I give myself away?" Xiao Yichen thought to himself, "This Gong Xiaoying is my grandfather after all. Even if I give myself away, he won't say that he will slit my neck with a knife, right?" Lisa said, "If my identity is exposed, I will die." Xiao Yichen was speechless. Chapter 36:21. Xiao Yichen was shocked. Would Lisa be in trouble if his identity was exposed? Gong Xiaoying was so cruel. It seemed like his grandfather was not cute at all. Xiao Yichen felt wronged and said, "I'm innocent. I don't care." Lisa grabbed him by the collar and said coldly, "So I'm warning you, if you expose yourself, I won't let you off." "Then, how can I not expose myself?" Xiao Yichen spread his hands and said, You and I talk like each other, how can he recognize us?" "It's fine if you don't talk, but once you do, you expose your IQ." After a pause, Lisa continued, "How can a leader who founded the Hurricane Group be so stupid? Besides, do you think he doesn't know that your mommy gave birth to twins? Not only does he know, but he also knows the biggest difference between you and Yu." "Yes," she admitted. Yu and Xiao Yichen really looked alike. However, this did not mean that they would not be exposed in front of a sly old fox like Gong Xiaoying. Xiao Yichen was curious and asked, "What's the difference?" Lisa said coldly, "One is talkative, the other is quiet." He was caught off guard. Xiao Yichen felt wronged. He did not think that he was a talkative person. Why did everyone say that he was talkative? Anyway, when he comes, you should talk less, eat less, and make less facial expressions. Xiao Yichen did not understand. "I can understand if you want me to talk less and make less facial expressions, but why should I eat less?" Lisa said expressionlessly, Yu eats very little, he doesn't eat as much as you. Usually, he only eats a few meals, but you ate 3 big bowls at once. It would be strange if he didn't suspect anything. Xiao Yichen felt that what she said made sense. Alright, he won't be here for long anyway. Although he won't be here for long, you can't let your guard down. Understand? Xiao Yichen saluted and said lazily, "Yes, sir." "Isn't it just eating less, talking less, and making fewer expressions? I might as well lock myself in my room." Lisa raised her chin and said, "In fact, Yu has always been like this. He rarely leaves his room, so when he comes, you better stay in your room and don't go anywhere, okay?" "Got it." The next day, Xiao Yichen woke up early and ate 2 big bowls of rice before Gong Xiaoying arrived. However, by noon, Gong Xiaoying was still nowhere to be seen. Could it be that he wasn't coming? Xiao Yichen thought excitedly that it would be best if she didn't come. It would save him the trouble of pretending to be Yu. In the afternoon, while he was taking an afternoon nap, he vaguely heard the sound of the door closing. Then, he heard Lisa and Alice's voices. Xiao Yichen turned over and squinted his eyes. Lisa, is he here? Master, young Master Fan is still taking an afternoon nap. Lisa didn't answer him immediately but said this instead. Xiao Yichen frowned and opened one of his eyes. However, he was surprised to see that the bed was surrounded by a crowd. He sat up in surprise, only to see Liza and Alice staring at him nervously and giving him meaningful looks. Xiao Yichen snapped out of his daze and glanced at the other side of the bed. He saw a man in his 50s standing in front of the window. He was wearing a suit and a military-style waistcoat. He was tall and handsome, but when he looked at him, his aura was intimidating. Chapter 36:22. He recognized that this man with a strong aura was Gong Xiaoying, his grandfather. Little Yichen immediately retracted his expression and put on an extremely cold expression as he stared at him in a daze. Gong Xiaoying looked at him and then at Alice. How's his condition? Alice immediately replied, he's almost recovered. After a year of recuperation, the functions of his organs are basically the same as a healthy person's. Xiao Yichen lowered his head silently. His cold expression was no different from Yu Yu's. Lisa's heart finally settled down. Gong Xiaoying came too suddenly. She had originally thought that something had happened at the last minute, so she cancelled her trip and wouldn't be coming. She didn't expect Gong Xiaoying to come so suddenly. She wasn't mentally prepared for it. Xiao Yichen was taking an afternoon nap, so Gong Xiaoying asked to see Xiao Yichen. She was worried that Xiao Yichen would be in a daze and wouldn't be able to react in time, so she told him that he was resting. However, Gong Xiaoying insisted on seeing him. She couldn't stop him, so she led him into the room uneasily. Fortunately, Xiao Yichen reacted quickly. Even though he had just woken up and was confused, he wasn't so muddle-headed that he would give himself away. Gong Xiaoying sat down on the side of the bed and said slowly, "Why didn't you call me?" Xiao Yichen looked up at him, but his mind skipped a beat. Lisa didn't mention how Yu usually addressed Gong Xiaoying. Old master? Or, grandfather? Lisa hurriedly said, young Master Fan hasn't woken up yet. Gong Xiaoying laughed when he heard that. Even if he's still asleep, he can't have forgotten how to address me, right? Xiao Yichen's heart suddenly felt uneasy. In the Gong family, etiquette was very important. When a junior met a senior, they would greet them. This was etiquette. Gong Xiaoying valued etiquette. Even the arrogant Gong Jia would have to greet his elders respectfully when he returned to Gong Xiaoying. There was a clear distinction between seniority and inferiority. Xiao Yichen glanced at Lisa and noticed that she was clenching her fists nervously. For a moment, he also felt uneasy. Outer. He called out tentatively while cautiously looking at Lisa to observe her expression. Seeing that Lisa did not express any strange attitude, he knew that calling him Grandpa was the right thing to do. Grandfather, he called out in a low voice. Gong Xiaoying smiled in satisfaction. He patted his head and asked gently, "Are you still asleep?" Xiao Yichen lowered his head and nodded lightly. Gong Xiaoying smiled and said, "Sleep a little longer." When Xiao Yichen heard that, he felt as if he had been granted amnesty and fell straight onto the bed. He wished that he could avoid having to deal with Gong Xiaoying. It was simply a blessing that he could continue sleeping. This way, he would not have to rack his brains to think of a way to not expose himself. Gong Xiaoying lowered his body and covered him with the blanket. Then, he stood up and walked out of the room. Before Lisa left, she whispered in his ear, Yu is very respectful to old master. You must not give yourself away. Okay. Lisa then left with a peace of mind. Xiao Yichen lay in bed until night time. When it was dinner time, he could no longer escape. Xiao Yichen then left the room and walked into the dining room. At that moment, everyone was seated at the table, including Gong Xiaoying. Chapter 36:23. However, he pretended to be calm as he walked to the table and sat down. He picked up his cutlery and buried his head in his food. Gong Xiaoying suddenly put down his cutlery and asked, "Some time ago, you took over Werther's piece of land. I didn't expect you to be able to take it back from Gu Jinglian. You're not simple." Xiao Yichen was stunned but didn't say anything. Gong Xiaoying continued, "The factories on that piece of land will probably all be leveled soon. When do you plan to carry out the experiment that you came up with?" Xiao Yichen was speechless. Experiment? What was an experiment? What was Werther? Gong Xiaoying said a bunch of terms that he didn't understand. How could he possibly answer this? How was he supposed to answer? Didn't they say that it would be fine as long as he ate less, spoke less, and made fewer expressions? How was he supposed to answer such a difficult question? Xiao Yichen looked up blankly and looked at Lisa. However, he saw that she was holding her forehead and looked like she was having a headache. She also didn't expect that Gong Xiaoying would come this time to discuss the issue of the North African experimental base with her. Xiao Yichen was speechless as he cut a piece of steak. He took a bite and swallowed it with difficulty. Seeing that Gong Xiaoying was staring at him, he elegantly wiped his mouth with a wet towel and said calmly, "I don't have any leads yet." Gong Xiaoying was speechless, Lisa was speechless, Alice choked on her dry red wine. Gong Xiaoying said suspiciously, "You were the one who suggested this experimental base. How can you say that you don't have any leads?" Xiao Yichen's expression didn't change, but his back kept breaking out in cold sweat. Alice was worried that the matter would be exposed and quickly poked her head with her finger. When Xiao Yichen saw this, he instantly realized that Alice must be hinting at something. But what did she mean by poking her head? Xiao Yichen also poked his own head and suddenly said, "Is there something wrong with your head?" Alice raised her head in shock and stared at him in horror. Lisa's eyes were wide open. She did not expect Xiao Yichen's comprehension ability to be so terrible. Gong Xiaoying was also stunned. What? What did he mean by there was something wrong with his brain? Alice face-bombed, looking like she was having a headache. When Xiao Yichen saw this, he finally understood what she meant. He held his forehead and pretended to have a headache. Lisa immediately stood up and pretended to be worried as she walked over to his side and held his shoulder. "Young Master Fan, does your head hurt again?" "It hurts." Xiao Yichen pretended to be patient and took a deep breath. "My head hurts." Lisa immediately looked at Alice worriedly. The latter also reacted. "Is it a reaction to the drug?" Gong Xiaoying looked at them suspiciously. "Headache?" Alice explained, "Some drugs will have a backlash effect and some strong side effects. It will stimulate the central nervous system of the brain and cause headaches." She was talking nonsense with a straight face, but Gong Xiaoying actually believed her. Alice and Lisa immediately helped Xiao Yichen up the stairs. When they were halfway up the stairs, Alice could not wait to take him away. She almost carried him away. When they reached the room, Alice asked her assistant to stand guard outside the door while she and Lisa dragged Xiao Yichen into the room. Xiao Yichen turned around and said, "Didn't I tell you not to talk so much? He asked me such a complicated question. How am I supposed to answer him?" Lisa also had a headache and said, "Master is probably here because of the North African experimental base." North African experimental base? Experimental base? Chapter 36-24. Xiao Yichen suddenly felt a headache coming on. "I don't even know what the experimental base he's talking about is." Lisa explained, "Not long ago, Yu bought a piece of land in North Africa. He wanted to make use of the favorable environment there to develop an electromagnetic experimental base." Alice suddenly interrupted her. "Lisa, he's been here for so long. Don't tell me you haven't even told him about something as important as the Heavenly Eye project?" Lisa didn't know what to say for a moment. Xiao Yichen was even more confused. "What's the Heavenly Eye project?" Alice sat down and immediately began to educate him. The Heavenly Eye project is a concept proposed by Yu. Through the research and development of quantum technology, they will create a Skynet that can cover the entire world's information network. Through this Skynet, missiles can be intercepted at any time, and any missile launch can be interrupted. In other words, if the Heavenly Eye project is successfully developed, Hurricane Group will become the overlord of the world. Xiao Yichen was stunned. Alice was simple and precise. In short, if the Heavenly Eye project is successfully developed, it can create and stop all wars. Xiao Yichen finally understood. So, if this project is successfully developed, Hurricane Group will completely control the world? Lisa and Alice looked at each other with gratification. They nodded and said in unison, "You can say that." Alice, in particular, did not understand. Xiao Yichen and Yu Yu were twins. They were both born in the same womb, but why was Yu Yu so crazy and Xiao Yichen so stupid? One proposed the idea of the Heavenly Eye project, while the other had to explain what the Heavenly Eye project was for a long time before he could understand it. She really wondered what their genetic makeup was like. Xiao Yichen said, "This question is too complicated. If he asks this again, I'll definitely give myself away." Even though he knew, if Gong Xiaoying really asked him about the Heavenly Eye project, he still wouldn't know a thing. "What should we do?" Lisa and Alice sighed. "Alice, did Master say that he'll be on the island for a few days?" Alice shook her head. "That means you don't know when he'll leave?" Xiao Yichen said impatiently. "Even if our identities are exposed, it doesn't matter. Yu doesn't belong to him. Why is he controlling Yu and using him to monopolize the world's rules? He's our grandfather, how can he use Yu like this? If of course, Mommy's Us would be sad." Before this, he had always thought that Gong Xiaoying had erased Yu Yu's memory and kept him in the Gong family because he loved Yu Yu and missed Yun Shishir. That was why he wanted to keep him by his side. But now, it seemed that Gong Xiaoying's intentions were not that simple. Could it be that he wanted to use Yu Yu to achieve his position as the king of Hurricane? That was too selfish. How painful was Yu Yu? How painful was Mommy? How painful was Daddy? Could it be that the feelings of so many people were not as important as his ambition? Could it be that his hatred for the Mu family was so deep that he couldn't let go of it? Chapter 36-25. Lisa pulled him back nervously and warned, "Keep your voice down. What if old Master hears you?" Xiao Yichen couldn't hide the gloom in his eyes. He stared at Lisa and said word by word, "So what if he hears you? If your identity is exposed, Yu will also be in trouble." "Why? Why should Yu and my fate be in his hands? I admit that Hurricane Group is very powerful, but Gong Xiaoying can't be so arrogant as to cover the sky with one hand, right?" Xiao Yichen said in a low voice, "In any case, I won't acknowledge this grandpa, and I won't call him that again." Lisa and Alice looked at each other with gloomy expressions. Xiao Yichen, calm down. Mu Yichen turned around expressionlessly with a frosty expression on his face. Lisa said, "It's best not to let Gong Xiaoying find out that you and Yu have swapped identities. He didn't keep Yu by his side purely to make use of him. Besides dealing with Xingyu." Before she could finish speaking, Xiao Yichen suddenly interrupted her. "What did you say?" Lisa knew that she had spilled the beans and immediately shut her mouth tightly. Xiao Yichen's eyes were bloodshot. He grabbed Lisa's collar and asked coldly, "Deal with Xingyu? Tell me, what other motives does Gong Xiaoying have? He used Yu to design the Heavenly Eye plan, and he actually wants to use Yu to deal with Xingyu?" Alice immediately stopped Xiao Yichen and pulled the two of them apart. "Both of you, calm down." "How can I calm down?" Xiao Yichen said sternly, "My biological grandfather is using my brother to deal with my father. How can I calm down?" Alice took a deep breath and sighed. Because he always thought that it was the Mu family who took everything away from him. Therefore, he did everything he could to destroy the Mu family and Xingyu. If Yu were still in Hurricane Group, the next step of the plan would have been to focus fire on Xingyu. Mu Yichen cried out, "Is he crazy? What benefits does he get from doing this? If Mommy finds out, she won't forgive him at all. When the time comes, if Xingyu declares bankruptcy and the Mu family Even if the Mu and Xingyu's mommies, I will still be by Daddy's side. He paused for a moment before continuing. Even if the Mu family has nothing left, be it Mommy, me, or Yu, we won't leave the Mu family. We won't go anywhere. Bang! The whoosh Xingyu's the loud noise startled the three people in the room. Lisa and Alice were stunned. They turned their heads and saw a tall figure outside the open door. It was incomparably clear in their eyes. Xiao Yichen turned around expressionlessly and saw Gong Xiaoying slowly striding in. Behind him, a row of tall guards followed closely behind him like stars surrounding the moon. Gong Xiaoying walked in and glanced at Xiao Yichen with his eagle eyes. He said coldly, "What a good, not going anywhere. It looks like your family of 4 is really loving." "You're wrong. It's not a family of 4, it's a family of 5. Gong Xiaoying was surprised when he heard this. What? Chapter 36-26. Gong Xiaoying's pupils constricted, but he soon broke into a smile. He calmed down and sized up Xiao Yichen. His words were sharp. "You are Mu Yichen?" Mu Yichen did not reply to him. He only glared at him coldly, clearly regarding him as an enemy. His eyes were full of hostility. Gong Xiaoying's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why is he here? Where's Gong Fan? Didn't I ask you to guard him?" Right from the start, he was acutely aware of the differences between Xiao Yichen and Yu. Even though Xiao Yichen was deliberately imitating Yu, be it his expression, tone, or style of doing things, it was hard not to leave traces behind. Xiao Yichen was Xiao Yichen. Yu was Yu. Both of them were unique, and no one could imitate them. Gong Xiaoying discovered the clues at one glance. At the dining table, he deliberately probed Xiao Yichen, who was caught off guard, and finally gave himself away. He was shocked, but he did not show it on his face. It was only when Xiao Yichen went upstairs that he followed him in puzzlement. Separated by a door, he could vaguely guess the whole story. The two children had been swapped. Yu was no longer on this island, and the person in front of him was not Yu but Mu Yichen. Gong Xiaoying did not expect things to turn out this way. He was extremely shocked. Xiao Yichen said expressionlessly, "Yu has a name. He's called Yun Tianyu, not Gong Fan. Yu doesn't care about the lousy name you gave him. The real Yu will only recognize the name Mommy gave him." Lisa saw the drastic change in his expression and immediately stood in front of Xiao Yichen protectively. She said nervously, "Master, I'm sorry." "Did they switch?" Gong Xiaoying raised his hand and ruthlessly slapped him across the face. Lisa was slapped in the face. Her body shook violently, but she did not fall down. She clenched her fists, raised her head, and said through gritted teeth, "Master, I'm sorry." "But..." Gong Xiaoying bellowed, "No buts." "Pa!" It was another vicious slap to the face. Lisa finally lost her balance and fell to the ground. She covered her burning cheeks, but immediately stood up. Without saying a word, she was ready to accept Gong Xiaoying's punishment. "Master, I'm sorry." Gong Xiaoying raised his hand again and slapped her cheek. Lisa calmly closed her eyes, but after a long time, the slap did not land. She opened her eyes in surprise, only to see Xiao Yichen holding Gong Xiaoying's wrist tightly. Gong Xiaoying was so strong, but under his grip, he did not move an inch. "You're not allowed to hit her," Xiao Yichen said coldly. "This has nothing to do with her, it's my idea." Gong Xiaoying sized him up coldly. "Oh? Your idea?" He did not believe that this child was smart enough to come up with such a plan to switch identities. Gong Xiaoying's bewildered gaze landed on Alice, and the latter took a step back in shock. Gong Xiaoying's sinister gaze was like an eagle's beak, making one tremble in fear. "Lock them up." At Gong Xiaoying's command, the bodyguards behind him rushed towards Alice and Lisa. One of the men had just grabbed Alice's arm when Xiao Yichen leaped up and delivered a flying kick to the man's elbow. Chapter 36-27. The back of his head hit the ground. The strong impact was like a magnitude 10 earthquake. No matter how iron-blooded a man was, he couldn't bear such intense pain and cried out in pain. Xiao Yichen kicked him a few meters away and shouted, "Who dares to touch them? Whose hand did I break?" Gong Xiaoying snorted. "You think you can go against Hurricane? You're overestimating yourself." Xiao Yichen laughed coldly. "Yes, I'm overestimating myself. Indeed, I'm just a child. I can't do anything to Hurricane. But..." He laughed evilly. "Will you kill me? In other words, unless you kill me, I won't let you touch the people I want to protect." Gong Xiaoying was stunned. He didn't expect a child to ask such a question and have such willpower. His words were a threat, a provocation, contempt, and disdain. Indeed, no matter what, he wouldn't lay his hands on his own grandson. Even if Xiao Yichen looked down on him and disdained him, the two of them were connected by blood. However, Gong Xiaoying wouldn't allow anyone to challenge his authority. "Take them down and lock them up." Just as Gong Xiaoying finished speaking, more than 10 mercenaries behind him rushed forward and surrounded Alice and Lisa. He didn't believe that Xiao Yichen could defeat so many of his men. Xiao Yichen looked coldly at Gong Xiaoying and stood in front of Lisa to protect her. Lisa immediately pushed him away forcefully. "Don't worry about me. I didn't fulfill my responsibility. This is the punishment I deserve. I'll take responsibility for my own actions. I was the one who swapped you. Even if I was wrong, it's my fault. It has nothing to do with you." "You?" Lisa stared at him in disbelief. She lowered her voice and questioned him. "Xiao Yichen, what are you thinking? Do you really want to make him your enemy?" Xiao Yichen said expressionlessly, "From the moment he used you, he was already my enemy. I don't want to acknowledge him as my grandfather anymore. No matter what, he can forget about using you to destroy the Mu family. Lisa, you have to remember that he's not your master. Yu is. Have you forgotten? Your Gong Jia is Yu's personal bodyguard. Only Yu has the right to decide your life and death. No one else." When Lisa heard this, she didn't know why, but her heart suddenly trembled. This man is my enemy and Yu's enemy. Since he's Yu's enemy, he's also your enemy. What right do you have to listen to him? If it were me, I wouldn't listen to him obediently. Gong Xiaoying finally couldn't take it anymore. Grandfather and grandson had turned against each other. He had never thought that his biological grandson would make him his enemy. His heart ached. It was hard to imagine that things would turn out this way. Instantly, he flew into a rage out of humiliation and said bitterly, "Take him down too. Lock him up." The mercenaries pounced on Xiao Yichen. Before he could react, Lisa, who was behind him, pushed him away. She reached out and gripped the man's hand tightly. With a sudden twist, she broke the man's elbow. The mercenaries surrounded them from all directions. Lisa and Xiao Yichen stood back to back as they dealt with the incoming mercenaries and bodyguards. Their teamwork was flawless. Chapter 36-28. Gong Xiaoying did not expect a child's ability to be so terrifying. Xiao Yichen and Lisa had their backs to each other in tacit understanding. Facing the enemies coming at them from all directions, they threw punches, hooked kicks, and sent flying kicks. Their coordination was amazing and flawless. An adult weighing more than 100 kilograms was sent flying by Xiao Yichen, who was not even 10 years old. He was sent flying. What kind of terrifying leg strength did he have to be able to send an adult flying so far with just one kick? Gong Xiaoying retreated half a step in shock. At that moment, he saw Xiao Yichen grab a man by the collar and throw him harshly against a cabinet. With a loud thud, the cabinet fell to the ground. Under Lisa's cover, Xiao Yichen rushed to Gong Xiaoying and grabbed him by the collar. He coldly ordered, "Prepare a boat for me. I want to leave this place. Don't even think of leaving unless you return Gong Fan." Mu Yichen sneered. "I don't know who Gong Fan is. I only have a younger brother, and his name is Yuntian Yu. Unless you kill me, Gong Xiaoying arrogantly raised his chin and enunciated each word clearly. Otherwise, don't even think of leaving this place. Mu Yichen narrowed his eyes. At this moment, countless armed mercenaries rushed over from behind. There were hundreds of bodyguards stationed on the castle. When they saw this scene, they thought that it was Mu Yichen who had kidnapped Gong Xiaoying. They were so shocked that they immediately raised their guns and aimed at Mu Yichen. Lisa saw this and rushed over to protect Mu Yichen. Don't shoot. This is Master's grandson. Don't shoot. The mercenaries did not put away their guns, though. They only listened to Gong Xiaoying's orders. Therefore, they did not listen to anyone else's words. Gong Xiaoying was very calm and coldly ordered, "Put away your guns." Only then did the mercenaries put away their guns. Gong Xiaoying lowered his head and exchanged glances with Mu Yichen. He warned, "Give up. I can't leave here." Then let me give you a kind warning. It's impossible for you to use you to go against Xingyu Financial Group and my daddy. Our family of 5 will never be separated. I can brainwash him, but I can also erase your memory. I'm warning you, if you dare to leave this place, I will erase your memory, just like Gong Fan. I told you, he's not Gong Fan. Mu Yichen was so angry that he laughed. If you're such a person who likes to force your will on others, who likes to manipulate the fate of others, then you don't deserve to be my grandfather, and you don't deserve to be my grandfather. You don't deserve my mommy to acknowledge you as her father. Pa, Mu Yichen glared at her. Lisa, who was watching from the side, was stunned. Only then did Gong Xiaoying react and look at his palm. Just now, when he lost control of his emotions, it was this hand that slapped him hard in the face. He hit him. He had used this hand to hit his own grandson. However, for some reason, when he heard Mu Yichen's hysterical words, he completely lost control. Yin Shishir was the pain he could not bring up. After being left outside for so many years, she was now unwilling to acknowledge him as her father for the sake of that brat from the Mu family. What he couldn't understand was why things had escalated to the point where he had become enemies with his own grandson. He had never thought that the situation would come to this. How did it come to this? You're my grandson. Chapter 36-29. Now, I want to leave this place. Whoever dares to stop me, don't blame me for being rude. As Mu Yichen spoke, he walked towards the door. Everyone was armed to the teeth and on high alert. They all raised their guns and were ready to fight. Lisa saw this and was worried. She immediately followed Mu Yichen out of the door. Lisa. Gong Xiaoying turned around angrily and said coldly, "Even you want to betray me?" Lisa's back stiffened, but she did not dare to turn around and look into his eyes. He turned around and said coldly, "Fine. Then I'll warn all of you. Unless I'm dead, none of you will be leaving this place." Mu Yichen stopped in his tracks but did not turn around. He raised his chin. Although his voice was not loud, it was powerful. "Unless you kill me, no one will be able to stop me." He had inherited Mu Yaja's arrogance. That small back view made Gong Xiaoying feel as though he was looking at Mu Yaja. He was completely enraged and clenched his fists tightly. Both of them were equally insufferably arrogant. One big and one small, they formed two terrifying energy fields. Mu Yichen had only taken a few steps when he suddenly felt a strange piercing pain in his back. He turned around in shock and saw a mercenary pointing a gun at him. He touched the place where the pain was coming from and felt a sticky trace of semen. "What is this?" Mu Yichen pursed his lips and looked coldly at Gong Xiaoying. He saw disappointment and indifference in his eyes. His heart had turned completely cold. However, he was not afraid at all. Even if he died, he wanted to leave this place. Mu Yichen's body swayed. He turned around and walked towards the door again. Gong Xiaoying was so stunned that he almost suffocated. Even so, this child did not beg him for anything. Where was he going? Did he really think that he could leave this isolated island just by walking out of this door? Even if he died, He wanted to return to that man's side. Mu Yichen's body swayed slightly as though he was about to fall. He struggled to hold onto the wall and slowly walked towards the door. A strong sense of dizziness engulfed him. His forehead was covered with cold sweat and he looked like he would faint in the next second. Gong Xiaoying looked at his stubborn expression and felt both pain and disappointment. Shoot! No! Lisa was so shocked that her eyes widened. She saw that a mercenary behind Mu Yichen had also raised his gun and aimed at him. She instinctively threw herself in front of Xiao Yichen. With a swoosh, an egg pierced her skin. She groaned and furrowed her eyebrows. Mu Yichen heard her painful voice and furrowed his eyebrows. Before he could turn around, he blacked out and knelt on the ground. He wanted to stand up but Lisa fell into his arms. Lisa, Li. Mu Yichen's gaze froze and he also fell to the ground. In the night, a pair of frightened eyes suddenly opened. Yu Yu sat up from the bed in shock. He instinctively held onto his abdomen where there was still a faint stinging pain. It was so painful, as though he had been shot by a bullet. He dreamt that he was imprisoned in a cage and desperately wanted to escape. However, he was surrounded by countless black shadows. Soon after, he felt that he had been shot many times and woke up from his dream. When he woke up, his back was covered in cold sweat. Chapter 36:30. What was going on? Why would he have such a dream? Yu Yu held his forehead. His temples were throbbing and his veins were popping as if they were about to explode. What's going on? Yu Yu tapped his temples in pain. When he got up, he heard a clear cry coming from next door. Boo-hoo, boo-hoo, it was Yueyao's voice. Yu Yu got out of bed and opened the door. Yueyao's room was next door. He walked in and turned on the lights. He saw a pair of small hands clutching the crib and her little legs kicking in aggrievedly. He walked to the bedside nervously and saw Yueyao crying so hard that her face was red and her eyelashes were stained with tears. Yu Yu bent down slightly and carried her in his arms, lifting her up gently. Now that he had learned how to carry a child, he could carry Yueyao comfortably. Surprisingly, when he carried Yueyao, Yueyao stopped crying. She widened her eyes curiously. The corners of her eyes were filled with tears. When she blinked her eyes gently, the tears started to flow. However, just as the tears started to flow, Yueyao opened her mouth and revealed two snow-white front teeth as she laughed. He, she laughed so happily that she reached out her little hand that was covered with her saliva and touched his face. Yu Yu frowned and pushed her hand away in disdain. He muttered, "Don't touch my face with your dirty hands." He patted her little hand and Yueyao retracted her hand in pain. She pursed her lips pitifully and looked like she was about to cry. Boo-hoo, she curled her little hand and stared at him innocently. She looked like she wanted to say something. However, she had not learned how to speak yet and could only babble out a few clumsy words. Brother, hug. Yueyao carefully reached out her chubby little hands and opened them, asking for a hug. Brother, hug me. Yu Yu was stunned. He looked at Yueyao and then looked at her fingers that were covered in saliva. He frowned. Even though he was disgusted, he still held her wrist and held her little hand. Yueyao tried to scratch his face. Her wet saliva was all over his face. At this moment, Yueyao finally stopped crying. She grinned as she grabbed his face. She couldn't bear to let go of it. Yueyao smiled even more happily. Yu Yu touched her face. Suddenly, he heard Yun Shishir's voice from behind him. Why are you awake to wake up? He turned around and saw Yun Shishir standing at the door. Her expression was gentle. Yu Yu was a little embarrassed and wanted to put Yueyao down. However, Yueyao clung to his clothes like a clingy kitten, unwilling to leave him. Yun Shishir was a little surprised. She said with some surprise, Yueyao likes to stick to you so much? She doesn't like to be hugged. Yu Yu was stunned. Oh, is that so? Yeah. You don't remember. When she was young, she would kick her legs and cry if anyone hugged her for too long. You and I were the only ones who were closest to her. I didn't expect that after you left for more than a year, she would still like to stick to you. When Yu Yu heard this, he didn't know why, but he felt a surge of warmth in his heart. She's hungry. Yun Shishir walked over and said to him, carry her. I'll warm up the milk for her. Yu Yu didn't say much. He only responded softly, okay. Chapter 36-31. Yu Yu lowered his head and looked at Yueyao in his arms. His gaze softened. Call me big brother. Yu Yu pinched her fleshy paw. Her soft touch made him feel an inexplicable sense of tenderness. However, she didn't do it when he asked her to. As though she didn't understand what he said, she tilted her head and blinked her clear eyes. She stared at Yu Yu with a confused expression. Didn't you call me big brother just now? Yu Yu shook her little hand and said, call me big brother again. Yu Yao babbled as she clutched his face. Her gaze suddenly landed on his chest. She opened her mouth wide, revealing her pink and tender gums. Suddenly, she opened her mouth wide and bit down on his shirt. Ah! Yu Yu's face turned pale. He told her stiffly, I don't have any milk for you. However, Yueyao didn't understand him. Her little hands clawed at his shirt and her little mouth bit his shirt. Her saliva stained his shirt. When Yun Shishir came in, she saw Yu Yu standing helplessly by the crib. Yueyao was biting his shirt as though she was drinking milk. Yueyao had been weaned for a long time and had been breastfeeding with powdered milk ever since. Seeing this scene, Yun Shishir didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She immediately walked over and put the milk bottle aside. She took Yueyao from Yu Yu's arms and hugged Yueyao. She coaxed her, are you hungry? As she coaxed her, she reached out to grab the milk bottle. However, Yu Yu had already taken the milk bottle and carefully placed it against Yueyao's mouth. Yueyao sucked on the pacifier and smacked it with relish. Sizzle, Yueyao held the milk bottle with her little hands and drank it with relish. Yu Yu stayed by her side quietly. However, he didn't look at Yueyao. Instead, he looked at Yun Shishir in a daze. Many complex emotions flashed across his eyes. However, Yun Shishir didn't seem to notice that he was staring at her. She said to herself, when you were young, you were much more obedient than your sister. Sometimes, when you were hungry in the middle of the night, you didn't cry. You slept until dawn without waking mommy up. When mommy woke up and ran to the crib in a panic, she saw you holding your fingers and nibbling on them with relish. At that time, I thought that you must have been worried about mommy's tiredness, so you didn't want to wake her. The boy was a little surprised. Were you still working back then? Yes. Until you were weaned until you were weaned at that time at. What about Daddy? Just as he blurted out, he realized that he had called him Daddy. His face turned red instantly. He turned his head awkwardly and didn't want to look at her. Yun Shishir smiled when she heard this. She immediately said, at that time, your daddy wasn't by our side. Did you know? In the past, there was no daddy or brother. There was only you and me. We depended on each other. Although life wasn't as good as it is now, Mommy was really happy with you. As she spoke, she recalled the happy past. Yun Shishir's eyes suddenly stung. She blinked her eyes and forced her tears away. She retreated and turned to look at Yu Yu. However, he was also staring at her without saying a word. Yun Shishir took a deep breath and said, don't leave mommy again, okay? Chapter 36-32. Yu Yu's expression was calm, but his heart was in turmoil. She said, don't leave me again. Why was it that when he heard those words, his heart was so moved? Especially when he heard the words, Yu Yu, he felt his heart burning. Countless chaotic thoughts flooded his mind in an instant. He abruptly rose to his feet and turned around. Just as he was about to leave the room, Yu Yao suddenly let go of the milk bottle and looked at him. She called out in a childish voice, Big brother. Yu Yu did not stop and walked back to the room. When Mu Yichen woke up, he opened his eyes and saw that his surroundings were bright. He looked around and wanted to move, but he realized that he was tied to a chair and could not move at all. Mu Yichen lowered his head and saw himself sitting on a chair. His hands were cuffed behind his back, and his legs were chained to the back of the chair. His body was also chained to the back of the chair. What was going on? Wasn't he shot? He looked around and finally saw that he was in a dark room. A beam of light shone down from the top of his head, and it was so bright that he could not open his eyes. Xiao Yichen tried his best to open his eyes and forced himself to adapt to the strong light. He looked at Lisa beside him, who was also tied to a chair. Her head was lowered and she was still unconscious. Mu Yichen looked at her back and saw that the wound was not deep. If it was a real bullet, it would not have left such a shallow wound. He carefully recalled that when he was shot, he fainted and was unconscious. Mu Yichen immediately realized that Gong Xiaoying must have ordered him to shoot with a tranquilizer gun. Could it be that they were shot with a tranquilizer gun? Xiao Yichen tried to call out to Lisa. Lisa! Lisa! Li! You're awake? A heavy voice suddenly interrupted his train of thought. Mu Yichen spun his head around in shock, only to see Gong Xiaoying standing in front of him and judging him from above. When he saw Gong Xiaoying, anger appeared in his eyes. He struggled and shouted, "What did you do to Lisa?" Gong Xiaoying said coldly, "Don't worry, she's not dead." When Mu Yichen heard that, he asked suspiciously, "You used a tranquilizer gun?" "Ha! You even know about tranquilizer guns. You're not simple." Gong Xiaoying pulled a chair over and sat down. He sighed and said, "My two grandsons, one is good at martial arts, one is smart and the other is good at martial arts. It's really an eye-opener." "Grandsons?" Mu Yichen mocked, "I didn't acknowledge you as my grandfather." "This lord, you'd better not be so sentimental." "I'll never acknowledge you as my grandpa." Gong Xiaoying did not exchange pleasantries and went straight to the point. "Where is Gong Fan?" Mu Yichen retorted, "Do you think I'll tell you? Besides, you're asking the wrong person. I don't know any Gong Fan. I don't need you to tell me. Since you've swapped identities, Gong Fan must be in the Mu family now." Mu Yichen snorted coldly, but he was a little flustered. Gong Xiaoying looked at him calmly. When he saw that he did not look at him, he said helplessly, "You're my grandson and I'm your grandfather. No matter how you deny it, it's a fact that can't be changed. You don't have to be so cold to me. It won't do you any good." Chapter 36-33. Mu Yichen was a prideful person. After all, he was Mu Yaja's son and had inherited Mu Yaja's arrogance. However, in front of Yun Shishir, Yu Yu, and Mu Yaja, he had always been a warm boy. However, in front of outsiders, he was a miniature version of Mu Yaja. How could he bow down to Gong Xiaoying? Whether it was threats or coercion, Xiao Yichen would never give in to him. When Gong Xiaoying heard this, the muscles on his face twitched and he was furious. He finally lost control of his emotions and stood up. Glaring at Xiao Yichen, he said, "I'm not threatening you. I'm not trying to scare you. If I can erase Yu's memory, I can erase yours too." It would have been better if he hadn't mentioned this. When he did, Xiao Yichen shouted at him furiously, "You're the one who erased Yu's memory. Just based on this, don't expect me to acknowledge you. Gong Xiaoying, in the past, I respected you because you were Mommy's biological father and my grandfather. Whether you admit it or not, I respected you. However, it doesn't mean that you can bully others. What right do you have to erase Yu's memory? What right do you have? Don't you love Mommy the most? If you love Mommy, why would you do something that would make her sad?" Gong Xiaoying was stunned and looked at him in surprise. He had expected this child to be angry, but he didn't expect him to be so calm even though he was angry. He was too calm. Gong Xiaoying said coldly, "Aren't you worried that if I erased Yu's memory, I can erase yours too?" "You can't erase it." Xiao Yichen said expressionlessly, "Even if you want to erase it, you can't erase mine." "Heh! Where does your confidence come from?" Gong Xiaoying scoffed. "Memories that can't be erased? I'd like to see what kind of memory Alice can't erase." No. Don't. At the side, Lisa struggled to raise her head. She opened her eyes and said weakly, don't. She was still under the effects of the anesthetic. As a result, he stuttered when he spoke, and his reactions were also extremely slow. However, when she heard that Gong Xiaoying had threatened Xiao Yichen that he would erase his memory, she suddenly became nervous. Gong Xiaoying shouted, "You betrayed me. You have no right to speak here." I didn't betray, Lisa spat out a few words with difficulty. Her words were intermittent and incoherent. Xiao Yichen looked at her. However, he heard Lisa say firmly, Yu is my master. I didn't betray him. Ever since that day when Gong Jia brought her to Yu and told her that he was the person she would be loyal to for the rest of her life, she swore to herself that Yu was her only master. Unless she died or Yu died, she would never change her heart. Yu was her only master. Even if she had to betray the whole world, she would never betray the person she was loyal to. She had never betrayed Yu. Hence, she was not a traitor. Lisa suddenly said in a powerful voice, "Me. I am not a traitor." Xiao Yichen was stunned. After a short moment of shock, he smiled. Lisa, it wasn't that he wasn't moved. He was touched by Lisa's sincerity. Chapter 36-34. Gong Xiaoying looked at Mu Yichen but didn't say anything in the end. He suddenly stood up and looked at Mu Yichen meaningfully. He said coldly, "Looks like you won't give up until you see the coffin. I'd like to see whose memory I can't erase." After he finished speaking, he immediately ordered his subordinates, "Bring Alice here." Yes. A few minutes later, two of his subordinates brought Alice in. Rather than saying that she was invited in, it was more accurate to say that she was forced in. When Alice walked into the darkroom, she saw Xiao Yichen and Lisa tied to the chairs and unable to move. Her gaze was shocked and she became sullen. "Boss, how could you tie Xiao Yichen up? He's your grandson." Gong Xiaoying looked at her coldly from the corner of his eyes. Suddenly, he walked in front of her and slapped her. Alice's face was instantly slapped to the side. "Don't think that I don't know what you've done. You can't escape the responsibility of swapping the two children. You know very well whether or not you're the one who did it. Do you need me to remind you of anything?" When Xiao Yichen saw this, he stared nervously at Gong Xiaoying and immediately warned him, "Don't hurt her." "Xiao Yichen." Alice turned her back to him and stopped him. "Don't talk. This has nothing to do with you." Xiao Yichen was stunned for a moment. Alice turned her face. There seemed to be some emotions in her eyes. She looked steadily at Gong Xiaoying. Her chest rose and fell for a long time. Suddenly, she smiled bleakly. "I know that I betrayed you. I deserve this slap. But boss, what kind of deep hatred do you have that you can't let go of it after so many years? What kind of deep hatred do you have that you want to take revenge on these two children? They were still so young. Yu's memories were erased. It was sealed by my hypnosis. However, ever since his memories were sealed, there wasn't a single day that I didn't regret it. Look at Yu, what has he become?" Gong Xiaoying was startled and suddenly stopped talking. "Do you think you're doing this for Yu?" He had forgotten all his memories. He had forgotten Yun Shishir and Mu Yaja. He had even forgotten who he was. "Do you think this is for his own good? You have no right to do this, and you have no right to erase Yu's memory and tamper with his life." "Shut up." Gong Xiaoying interrupted coldly, "I don't need you to tell me what to do." "Yes. You're high and mighty, you're insufferably arrogant. Now, the Gong family can call the wind and summon the rain, looking down on everything. No one has the right to criticize you about what you're doing." "But..." Alice's lips suddenly trembled violently as she spoke. "Yu is innocent. He's just a child. He just wants to be by his mommy's side. Look at how cute Yu used to be. He was with his family and he was smiling every day. But now? He's become a cruel, cold, and insensitive person. He's also become someone with terrifying ambitions and hatred that shouldn't exist at his age. He's just a child. How can you bear to torture him like this? Chapter 36-35. Alice did not care about anything else. If you persist in doing this, your daughter will never forgive you. Gong Xiaoying's pupils constricted as he stared fixedly at Alice. It was as if he was an explosive that could explode at any moment. Alice had always been fearful of Gong Xiaoying. However, there was no trace of fear in her eyes right now. Right now, I want you to seal this child's memory, just like how you sealed Yuntinyo's. She would not make the same mistake a second time. Even though she had no feelings for Xiao Yichen. However, perhaps because she could no longer have children in this lifetime, she could understand the pain of a mother and son turning against each other. Hence, she could understand Yun Shishir's pain, as well as Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen's pain. She had already killed Yun Tianyu, she could not kill Xiao Yichen as well. Gong Xiaoying glanced at Mu Yichen before returning his gaze to Alice. His tone was full of threat. Do it right now. No. Alice took a deep breath and rejected him coldly. I don't want to do this kind of thing again. She mustered up her courage and rejected him with an incomparable conviction. She knew what the consequences of going against the man's order were and what it meant. The man standing in front of her was the head of the Gong family. What's more, he was the person with the highest authority in the Hurricane group. Alice knew very well what it meant to go against his order. It was just that she was unwilling to do so and was even more unwilling to comply with his decision. Gong Xiaoying did not expect Alice to go against his order. His gaze turned stern as he sized her up in disbelief. He was so angry that he laughed. Do you know what you're saying? I know, and I know very well that I'm going against your order. You asked me to wipe Xiao Yichen's memory, but I said no. Alice's tone gradually softened as she spoke. Boss, please, don't go on like this. You've already hurt Yun Shishir and Yun Tianyu once, how can you bear to do it again? Do you really want to fall out with Yun Shishir and her father? Gong Xiaoying was stunned for a moment before he regained his senses. He gritted his teeth and said, whether it's Mu Yichen or Yun Tianyu, didn't she get together with Mu Yaja because they have 2 children? Now, if the 2 children are in my hands, she'll go home. At the mention of Yun Shishir, gentleness appeared in his eyes. The reason why he hated Mu Yaja so much was not just because of the previous generation's feud. He knew that Yun Shishir gave birth to these 2 children because she was a surrogate mother for the Muse when she was 18. She, Gong Xiaoying's daughter, his daughter, was so lowly that she was used by the Muse? How could his daughter do such a despicable thing? How dare the Muse? Therefore, he could never forgive the Mu family and Mu Yaja for doing such a thing to his daughter. So what if Yun Shishir returns to your side? Alice hysterically tried to wake him up. What's the difference between you and an executioner? Shut up. Gong Xiaoying stopped her. Don't think that I won't dare to touch you just because you're Gong Jie's woman. Even if I kill you today. Chapter 36-36. Alice was not afraid at all. My life is in your hands. The fate of so many people in the Hurricane group is also in your hands. Killing me is just a matter of words. But don't you regret it? You, Gong Xiaoying raised his hand high, but Alice just stared at him without retreating. However, his hand did not fall for a long time. Do you think you're the only one who knows hypnotism? Gong Xiaoying's hand fell slowly, but he laughed coldly. Do you think I can't do it without you? Alice was stunned. Gong Xiaoying turned around and said in a low voice, "Come in." As soon as his voice fell, he saw the door slowly open, and a man wearing a white cloak slowly walked in. The man was very young and very thin. He was wearing a cloak, but it seemed empty. His face was buried under the brim of the hat, and the shadow covered his eyes. But it was not difficult to see that this man's features were exquisite. It was just that this exquisiteness was mixed with some elements of gender. There was a gloomy and cold aura around him, like a poisonous snake, beautiful but deadly. It had nothing to do with gender. This kind of beauty could make people hold their breath and focus. He was holding a crystal ball in his hand. However, this crystal ball looked a little special. Inside the transparent glass, there was a ball of purple fog, swirling and rolling. Mu Yichen's heart skipped a beat when he raised his head and saw the man. He did not know why, but this man had an especially dangerous aura. As the man walked in, he took off his hat. His face was exposed to the air. It was feminine but beautiful. When Alice saw him, she sucked in a breath of cold air. Master, Senior? Back then, she had studied hypnotism under a master hypnotist. There were only a few students under the master's name. Hypnotism also required talent. There were not many people who had this kind of talent. It could be said that it was 1 in a million. As for this man, he was one of her senior martial brothers. His hypnotism skills were above hers. How could it be her? The man glanced at her and acted as if she didn't exist. He walked to Gong Xiaoying and nodded slightly in greeting. Unless he was hypnotized, he was usually very quiet and did not speak much. However, as soon as he spoke, the first sentence he said was enough to bewitch the mind of the person who was being hypnotized. His voice seemed to have a unique magic power. Sometimes, Alice felt that his hypnotism was not hypnotism, but a kind of magic that could not be explained by scientific means. Senior, why are you here? The man turned around and finally saw her. His deep eyes were like a dark black jade without any luster, but like a bottomless pool of water. Just a glance, it seemed to be able to suck one's soul. Gong Xiaoying said coldly, seal up all of that child's past memories, do you understand? The man nodded gently. Yes. It was just one word, but it was as cold as the ice and snow of the North Pole, causing people to feel a chill in their hearts. Senior, you can't do that. Alice said in a panic, you can't erase this child's memory, Senior, take her away. Gong Xiaoying ordered impatiently. Chapter 36-37. The man in the white robe walked slowly to Xiao Yichen and squatted down gracefully. His dark eyes scanned every inch of Xiao Yichen's features and his thin lips slowly curved into a cold smile. Just by looking into his eyes, Xiao Yichen felt as if his body was frozen and he couldn't move. At the side, Lisa saw this and started to struggle. The man glanced at her from the corner of his eyes but didn't take her seriously. No matter how powerful she was, she wouldn't be a threat if she was tied up like this. However, with someone else around, it would be easy to disrupt the hypnosis if they made any noise during the hypnosis. The man said softly, take her away. Take her away. Gong Xiaoying gave the order and Lisa was immediately taken out of the room. He also left with his men. All the doors were locked from the inside. The man slowly lifted the crystal ball and held it in front of Xiao Yichen. The latter was attracted by the illusory purple fog in the crystal ball and his eyes suddenly lost focus. He felt as if he was about to enter the man's world. He immediately pinched his palms and forced himself to wake up. Xiao Yichen shook his head forcefully and turned his face away from the man. If he didn't look at him, he wouldn't be hypnotized. The man smiled faintly. He had hypnotized countless people, but most of them were unwilling to do so. Who do you want to see the most now? The man gently placed his hand on the surface of the crystal ball and caressed it. He said casually, is it her? When Xiao Yichen heard this, he couldn't help but be attracted by the man's words. He turned his head and looked at the crystal ball. However, he saw that the fog in the crystal ball gradually transformed and reflected Yun Shishir's gentle smile. Mommy. Mommy, Xiao Yichen was completely shocked. He could actually see Yun Shishir's face in the crystal ball. The man observed his expression and asked faintly, who is she? Xiao Yichen looked at him and bit his lip hard, but he didn't say anything. Cold sweat, drop by drop, continuously slid down from his forehead and flowed into the gaps between his lips. It was extremely bitter. Oh, that's not her. The man stroked the surface of the crystal ball again. Xiao Yichen stared intently at the crystal ball. The fog continued to transform, and a tender but adorable face was reflected in the crystal ball. Yueyao, Yueyao. Xiao Yichen suddenly became agitated. He struggled, but the more he struggled, the tighter his hands were tied. What are you trying to do? He questioned angrily. The man smiled and held the crystal ball in front of him. In the crystal ball, that tender and cute face slowly came to life. Yueyao opened her eyes wide and stretched out her hands towards him. Brother, hug, Yueyao, is she the one you want to see? The man stroked the crystal ball again, and the fog transformed into Yuyu's face again. However, Yuyu's eyes were cold, as if she was a stranger. Yuyu, who was reflected in the fog, suddenly opened her mouth and spoke. Mu-Yichen, don't come back. Her voice was cold, but every word was cruel and heartless. Xiao Yichen was stunned. He frowned and couldn't believe that Yuyu had said those words. Why? He smiled bitterly and said to Yuyu, why don't you come back? Because no one needs you. Chapter 36-38. He didn't know why, but no matter how tough the environment was or how hopeless the situation was, Xiao Yichen's heart was about to break when he heard Yuyu's words. You don't need me, that's right. Yuyu echoed in the crystal ball, no one needs you. Xiao Yichen's pupils gradually lost focus. He stared at the crystal ball numbly. A line of tears slowly flowed down from his left eye. One tear, followed by another. In an instant, his face was covered with tears. The man looked at him as if he had been hypnotized. He smirked coldly. It's not like that. Xiao Yichen suddenly looked up and said angrily, breaking down, it's not like that. Yuyu wouldn't say such things. This isn't Yuyu. This is an illusion created by you. The man smiled and said, I'm not a sorcerer and I don't know magic. This isn't created by me. It's your inner world. He inched closer to little Yichen and slowly breathed in through his thin lips. You yearn to be needed and valued. You're afraid of being outlawed and ignored, right? But you're not needed and you're not relied on. They don't need you. It's not like that. Xiao Yichen screamed crazily, you're bewitching me again. I want mommy, daddy, Yuyu, and Yueyao. They all need me, they all need me. He was irreplaceable. He was Mu-Yichen. The man smiled and said, have you been lying to yourself all this time? Mu-Yichen gritted his teeth. Suddenly, he leaned over and hit the crystal ball in his hand. With a loud crack, the crystal ball fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. The fog in the sphere slowly rose. Mu-Yichen could only feel the fog gradually condensing. Finally, it transformed into Yuyu's appearance. A living Yuyu was standing right in front of him, as if he could reach out and touch her. The entire world was plunged into darkness. It was so dark that one couldn't even see one's fingers. Everything had changed. The white-robed man also seemed to have disappeared. Mu-Yichen lowered his head and looked at his body. There were no ropes, no handcuffs, no chains, and no chair. He stood up and looked up. Yuyu was still standing in front of him, but she did not disappear. Yuyu. Mu-Yichen anxiously rushed towards him and held him in his arms. His body was so cold that it was as if he had no body temperature. Why is it so cold? He nervously grabbed Yuyu's shoulders and sized him up. However, Yuyu coldly pushed him away. Don't touch me. As Yuyu spoke, his gaze landed on the necklace around his father's neck, only to see a necklace around his neck. It was a purple crystal. All of a sudden, Yuyu forcefully tore the amethyst off and casually dropped it on the ground. You, don't call my name. Yuyu turned around coldly. Mu-Yichen, no one needs you anymore. Mommy and Yueyao already have me. No one wants you to come back. So. He slowly turned his head. His eyes were covered by the shadows. His lips were curled into an extremely cold smile. Don't come back. No, it's not like that. Mu-Yichen shook his head in disbelief and forced a bitter smile. Yuyu, I know you lost your memory and don't remember me. But it's okay. You will definitely regain your memory. Chapter 36-39. Xiao Yichen stared at Yu Yu in disbelief. He did not understand why he would say such a thing. In his impression, Yu Yu was a tsundere, but he had a gentle heart. He would never monopolize Mommy's love. This was not Yu Yu, however. The person standing in front of him, with those familiar eyes, was clearly Yu Yu. But why would Yu Yu say such cruel words? Yu Yu saw that Xiao Yichen did not speak, so he asked coldly, "Haven't you noticed? No matter what, Mommy always prioritizes me. In her heart, I've always been more important than you. You should have noticed this, right?" Xiao Yichen's face turned ashen. Yes. Mommy had always prioritized Yu Yu. This had always been the case. This was because Yu Yu's health was not good. Yu Yu was good at pretending to be obedient. Xiao Yichen prided himself as an elder brother. Hence, he knew how to take care of Yu Yu, regardless of how big or small the matter was. Even if Mommy valued Yu Yu more than him, it did not matter. Even if Daddy valued Yu Yu more than him, it did not matter. This was because Yu Yu was his younger brother. His most beloved younger brother. No one could replace his position in his heart. Whether it was Mommy, Daddy, Yu Yu, or Yueyao, they were all his dearest family members. They were all unique and could not be replaced. However, when he heard Yu Yu say such cruel words, Xiao Yichen could not help but feel a sense of loss. A smug look appeared on Yu Yu's face. Mommy loves me more. Compared to me, you're nothing in Mommy's heart. Xiao Yichen glared at him and clenched his fists. He suddenly lowered his head, looking extremely disappointed. Yu Yu sized him up arrogantly and said casually, "I went missing for a year. Mommy didn't eat or drink. When she found out about my whereabouts, she was willing to use you to replace me and bring me home. What about you? You can only stay on this huge island all by yourself." "It's not like that, oh?" Yu Yu asked calmly, "Then what is it?" "Mu Yichen, you don't have to deny it. Mommy values me more than you. Mommy and Mommy have depended on each other since we were young. What about you? How can you compare yourself to me?" As he spoke, he smiled coldly. "You don't have to come back. I'm enough for Mommy." Little Yichen smiled bitterly and raised his head, revealing a trail of tears on his face. He smiled with tears in his eyes and said gently, "Yu Yu, even if Mommy loves you the most, it doesn't matter. I won't be sad. Because you're my younger brother." Yu Yu, who was standing in front of him, was in a daze. "You're my younger brother. I'll give you everything. I won't fight with you. Don't worry, I won't be sad." Xiao Yichen wanted to hug him as he said this. With a look of disgust, Yu Yu broke free from him and flung his hand away. "Don't touch me with your hand," Yu Yu said coldly. "I don't want an older brother like you." Xiao Yichen was stunned. Yu Yu's words pierced his heart like a knife through butter. "Why?" Xiao Yichen forced a smile, but it was stiff. "Is it because I didn't do well enough? Or, you don't like me?" "It's not that I don't like you. I hate you." Yu Yu's eyes were fierce. "If it weren't for you, Mommy would only belong to me. I hate people who want to steal Mommy from me. I didn't steal her." Chapter 36-40. After a pause, Mu Yichen said nervously, "Mommy only belongs to you. I won't snatch her away, okay? Yu Yu, don't be like this." As he said this, he helplessly reached out to grab Yu Yu's hand. However, Yu Yu took half a step back in disgust. It was as if he felt dirty just by touching him. "Don't touch me." Yu Yu's figure gradually blurred and turned into a thin mist before dissipating. "No." Xiao Yichen pounced on him sadly, but it was all in vain. When he looked up again, the scene in front of him had changed again. He saw Xiangdi stroll. His home. At this moment, he couldn't tell if he was in a dream or reality. Xiao Yichen bit his lip hard and tried to walk forward. He stood outside the main door. Through the lanyard and across the courtyard, he saw Yun Shishir carrying Yueyao through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Mommy. He anxiously groped for the door and tried to open it, but the door was locked from the inside. He was blocked outside the door and couldn't get in. Mommy, open the door. Mu Yichen shouted frantically, Mommy, it's me, Xiao Yichen. I'm back. However, no one paid attention to him. It was as if he was a ball of air that no one could see. A sense of loneliness enveloped him. Mu Yichen suddenly felt that he couldn't breathe. The feeling of being completely ignored overwhelmed him. Mommy, can you hear me? Mu Yichen's throat was blocked. He choked and said, It's me. I'm Xiao Yichen. Open the door and let me in, okay? I want to go home. Yu Yu's voice suddenly came from inside the house. Yueyao, your brother is here. Xiao Yichen retreated back to Lan Shan. Through the floor-to-ceiling window, he saw Yueyao staggering towards Yu Yu. Yun Shishir and Mu Yaja stood at the side, looking at him with gratified expressions. Yu Yu hugged Yueyao and lovingly hugged the cuddly little ball in his arms. Yueyao hugged Yu Yu's neck tightly and smiled. Brother. This clear and loud sentence made everyone beam with joy. Xiao Yichen heard Yueyao's laughter through the window and couldn't help but laugh as well. He hadn't seen Yueyao for a long time and missed her very much. Now, just hearing her clear voice warmed his heart. Yueyao, his little princess. Xiao Yichen stood outside the villa and looked on eagerly. However, the warm scene in the house seemed to have nothing to do with him. He wanted to go home more and more, to return to that warm home. He missed Mommy, Yueyao, and Daddy so much. He missed Yu Yu so much. Xiao Yichen went back to the main door and pressed the doorbell forcefully. However, no matter how long he pressed it or how many times he pressed it, no one answered him. Outside, the cold wind gradually became bitterly cold. He was shivering from the cold. Mu Yichen couldn't wait any longer. He nimbly climbed over the door and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Standing outside, he gently knocked on the door and window and smiled gently. Mommy. Yu Yu. Daddy, Yueyao. Xiao Yichen tidied his clothes seriously and smiled. I'm going home. Everyone in the house suddenly fell silent. Yun Shishir and Mu Yaja turned around. Yu Yu also turned around with Yueyao in her arms. However, when her gaze landed on Xiao Yichen, her expression immediately turned cold. Chapter 36-41. Yu Yu walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and pulled the door open. He asked coldly, Why did you come back? Xiao Yichen's smile froze. He said in a daze, Because, this is my home. This is not your home. This is my home. Get out. Yu Yu pointed at the door and said coldly, You're not welcome here. How could this be? Xiao Yichen gasped and looked at Yu Yu. However, he heard Yun Shishir's cold voice. Don't stand here. You're an eyesore. He looked in the direction of the voice and saw Yun Shishir walking towards him. Xiao Yichen reached out his arms and wanted to hug her. However, Yun Shishir slammed the window and locked it from the inside. Xiao Yichen was once again locked outside the door. He was dumbfounded. Mommy, Yun Shishir said disdainfully through the floor-to-ceiling window, Don't come back. I don't want to see you. Why? Xiao Yichen finally panicked. He anxiously knocked on the door and window as tears streamed down his face. He cried painfully. Mommy. Mommy, it's me. I'm Xiao Yichen. Did I do something wrong? Why don't you want to see me? Mommy? Mommy. The man in the white robe stood up slowly. He held the crystal ball in his hand and stared coldly at Mu Yichen, who was tied to the chair and had already entered a hallucination. Mu Yichen leaned against the back of the chair and closed his eyes. His brows were furrowed as he kept muttering, Mommy. Mommy, don't leave me. Mommy. From the moment he broke the crystal ball, Xiao Yichen had already entered a hypnotic environment. Everything he saw was a hallucination. A hallucination that he had created. The highest level of hypnotism was to dig out the deepest, darkest part of a person. Everyone had their darkest side. Even Xiao Yichen was no exception. In the deepest part of his heart, there was a fatal fear. In reality, Xiao Yichen looked cheerful, gentle, and adorable on the outside, but he didn't realize that deep down, he was afraid of losing Yun Shishir's attention. He had always known that Yun Shishir placed more emphasis on Yu Yu. It was difficult to balance a bowl of water. It was hard to be fair when it came to doting on two people. Xiao Yichen had always known that Yun Shishir took care of Yu Yu more. It wasn't that he wasn't envious, but as an older brother, he didn't care. However, deep in his heart, he still longed for Yun Shishir to love him more. She wanted to be on par with Yu Yu. However, these selfish thoughts had always been suppressed at the bottom of his heart. Xiao Yichen didn't care who his mommy loved more. Whether it was his mommy or Yu Yu, they were all inseparable family. As long as he could be with his family, he was already very satisfied. However, through hypnotism, the uneasiness in his heart, as well as the fear of being ignored, were magnified several times. The hypnotism created an illusion for him. Through this illusion, he would face the deepest fear in his heart. This fear would be magnified continuously, and it would become an unbearable nightmare. This nightmare was an incomparably cold world. He couldn't walk out at all, and it would be difficult for him to escape. Chapter 36-42. Mu Yichen sat on the chair, his eyelashes trembling violently. Then, a teardrop slowly flowed out of his eye. Despair, the white-robed man let out a faint sigh. No matter how strong a person's mind was, it would be difficult for him to accept the despair of betrayal. In Xiao Yichen's heart, whether it was Yun Shishir, Mu Yaja, Yu Yu, or Yue Yao, they were very important to him. It went without saying how important they were. Entering such a despairing illusion must be very despairing. The white-robed man scrutinized his face. Suddenly, he sensed something strange. Xiao Yichen's expression gradually softened. It was the kind of softness that came from relief. Yu Yu. Yue Yao, as he softly muttered her name, his lips curved into a doting and warm smile. He seemed to be relieved. What's going on? The white-robed man stared at him in shock. He had entered his hypnotic illusion. An experienced hypnotist could easily enter the hypnotized person's environment. He entered Xiao Yichen's illusion and saw Xiao Yichen standing alone at the entrance of the villa. He looked like an orphan who had been abandoned by the world. His back view was bleak and lonely. However, he hid in the bushes outside the villa. He leaned against the railings and looked at the courtyard. The man walked to his side. He could see through the illusion and see the scene in Xiao Yichen's imagination. Xiao Yichen could not see him. He could also see what he could see through little Yichen's eyes. In the courtyard, Yu Yu sat on the swing. Yun Shishir stood beside him and gently pushed him. Yu Yu was having fun and let out a string of bell-like laughter. Ha! Mommy, higher. Higher. Okay. Yun Shishir laughed and pushed him higher. Mu Yaja stood to the side with Yue Yao in his arms, watching everything with a gentle gaze. The family of four, without Xiao Yichen, was still happy and harmonious. Xiao Yichen didn't dare to rashly barge in again and disturb the peace. He stood guard outside the door and secretly watched this scene, but his heart was filled with happiness. Especially when he heard Yu Yu's crisp laughter, the smile on his face deepened. Be careful. Even though he knew that no one could hear him, he was still worried that the swing would swing too high and Yu Yu would accidentally fall. From the anticipation and envy in his eyes, it could be seen that he really wanted to join them. However, he didn't dare to destroy this beautiful moment. He knew that he was no longer welcome and was no longer accepted. However, he still harbored a tiny bit of hope. Even if he were to hide in a corner where they couldn't see him, he would still be satisfied watching the scene. The white-robed man was a little shocked. He squatted down and scrutinized Mu Yichen. It was hard to imagine that such a child would not feel unjust and indignant because of such a cold dream and fantasy. Would he not be angry? Everyone ostracized him, distanced themselves from him, and treated him coldly. His most beloved younger brother said to him, "Don't come back. His most beloved mommy said to him, "We don't need you anymore." His most trusted daddy said coldly, "Get lost. I don't want to see you." Was he really not sad at all? He was betrayed by his family and did not feel any sense of loss or despair. Was he really? Chapter 36-43. The white-robed man followed Xiao Yichen's gaze. The scene in front of him was heartwarming and warm. However, the illusion that he had created for Xiao Yichen was not like this at all. Could it be that Xiao Yichen had used his own willpower to tamper with the illusion? An experienced hypnotist would create an illusion to lure the hypnotist into a false illusion. The betrayal of one's loved ones and the abandonment of one's family. In this way, the hypnotist would begin to doubt himself and eventually abandon all of his memories. Yu had witnessed those cruel memories and had begun to doubt himself. In the end, he had been devoured by his first personality, and even his first personality's memories had been sealed away. However, Xiao Yichen did not follow his lead and follow the illusion that he had created. Instead, he changed the direction of the illusion. When the white-robed man saw this, he immediately waved his hand gently and the scene in front of him disappeared immediately. Mu Yichen only felt a blur in front of his eyes and the villa was no longer there. Yu and Yueyao were no longer there either. Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir were also gone. Instead, there was a cloud of smoke lingering around them. He only felt that he was in a dark environment where he could not even see his own fingers. Xiao Yichen panicked for a moment but quickly calmed down. He walked in the fog and looked around. He stretched out his hand and tried to push aside the heavy fog, but he could not see his surroundings clearly. "Mommy," Xiao Yichen tried calling out a few times but could only hear his voice echoing continuously. He could not hear anything else. Yu, he carefully walked through the fog but could not see any trace of anyone. It must be a nightmare, it must be a nightmare. Xiao Yichen kept telling himself in his heart, hoping that he could wake up from the nightmare as soon as possible. However, in the blink of an eye, he vaguely saw a snow-white figure in front of him. "Who's there?" Xiao Yichen panicked and chased after the figure. "Mommy. Yu, is that you?" He chased after them in a panic, but after running for an unknown amount of time, he felt something tripping him. All of a sudden, he fell to the ground. Xiao Yichen looked up tiredly, only to see a small figure standing in front of him. The dense fog dispersed. The little guy's face gradually became clearer. Xiao Yichen's eyes were filled with shock. He saw the little Yueyao standing in front of him, looking down at him with disdain. She was still sucking on the pacifier with relish. However, her gaze was empty, as if she was being controlled by someone. What was familiar was her face, but what was unfamiliar was the feeling she gave off. Before Xiao Yichen could finish his sentence, he felt a dull pain in his chest. He looked down in shock and saw a small hand tightly holding a dagger. The small hand at the end of the dagger belonged to the innocent and harmless little Yueyao. She ruthlessly stabbed the dagger into his abdomen, but a creepy smile appeared on her face. The corners of her mouth cracked open, and the pacifier fell to the ground. However, she laughed even more happily and let out a crisp laughter that was like the sound of nature. "Ha ha ha, so much blood." Little Yueyao retracted her hand and wiped the blood off her face. She smiled innocently. However, in such an environment, coupled with her smile, it was hard not to shudder. Chapter 36-44. Xiao Yichen gently clutched his abdomen. He accidentally used too much force and blood started to flow out. "Why?" He stared at Yueyao in disbelief. He didn't know why the little sister he had always doted on would suddenly stab him so cruelly. "Why?" Yueyao looked at him. Her gaze instantly became fierce and cold. She said in a childish voice, "I'm going to kill you." "Why?" Xiao Yichen shook his head and smiled bitterly. "No, you're not Yueyao. Yueyao wouldn't do this to me." "She wouldn't." Pfft. Xiao Yichen's body suddenly froze. The muscles on his back started to twitch uncontrollably. He stood up with difficulty and lowered his head. Another sharp dagger pierced through his body from behind. Little Yichen staggered a step and swayed as he turned around, only to see his younger brother's face, which was as cold and terrifying as a malicious spirit's. "Didn't I tell you not to come back?" Yu Yu shouted at him in a shrill voice. "Didn't I tell you to get lost? Why did you come back?" Xiao Yichen looked at Yu Yu. He clenched his teeth and started to cry. Tears trickled down her cheeks and flowed down her face. He stubbornly wiped his tears and said in a hoarse voice, "Yu Yu, don't do this. I'll kill you. I'll kill you." Yu Yu suddenly pulled out the dagger and kept approaching him. "Mu Yichen, after I kill you, Mommy will belong to me completely. I won't have to worry about anyone else stealing Mommy's love from me. Without you, Mommy will only dote on me." Little Yichen's throat churned as the taste of blood gushed out of his throat. He swallowed hard to suppress the taste of blood and explained, "No. I'm not trying to snatch your mommy away from you. Yu Yu, I'm your brother. I'm your brother. Shut up." Yu Yu shouted at the top of her lungs, "You're not my brother. I told you to shut up, I don't have a brother like you." As he spoke, he gripped the dagger tightly and approached Xiao Yichen. "No. Don't," Xiao Yichen kept crying and begging. With his strength, whether he was in a dream or seriously injured, he was fully capable of capturing the frail child in front of him. But he couldn't bear to. He couldn't bear to hurt Yu Yu. Even if he was covered in injuries, he did not want to hurt Yu Yu at all. "Yu Yu. I'm your brother, don't be like this. Open your eyes and take a good look." Pfft. Unwilling to let him go, Yu Yu grabbed the man's collar with one hand and stabbed the dagger into his flesh mercilessly. Ugh! Little Yichen let out a muffled groan as blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. He gripped Yu Yu's shoulder tightly. Due to the excruciating pain that almost numbed his nerves, he subconsciously wanted to push Yu Yu to the ground. However, after a short while, the strength in his hands suddenly relaxed. Xiao Yichen smiled helplessly. No matter what, he could not bear to hurt his brother. "Yu Yu. It's okay if you don't remember me." Little Yichen uttered these words with much difficulty. He clenched his fists tightly as he endured the suffocating pain. His back was drenched in cold sweat. With a numb expression, Yu Yu stabbed the man again and again with the dagger. Chapter 36-45. Yu Yu's ferocious face kept getting bigger and bigger in front of him. His eyes were bloodshot and they seemed to have dyed his eyes red. Xiao Yichen's body gradually went limp and he fell to the ground. He couldn't count how many times he had been stabbed. Yu Yu didn't attack his vital points. He only knew that Yu Yu was his younger brother. Even if he didn't recognize him, hurt him, and wanted to kill him, he couldn't hurt Yu Yu. "Yu Yu," Xiao Yichen choked and said, "It's me. Open your eyes and take a good look, okay? Yu Yu, it's me. Mu Yichen." Yu Yu stabbed him for the last time. He smiled coldly and said expressionlessly, "I know you're Mu Yichen." Mu Yichen was stunned. "Do you think I've lost my memory? What a joke. I only used you to chase you away from Mommy. Now, I've returned to Mommy's side. As for you, you'll die a horrible death here." Mu Yichen froze. He shook his head vigorously and forced a smile. "No. It's not like this." Before he could finish his sentence, Mu Yichen vaguely heard the sound of high heels not far away. Her high heels made an extremely pleasant sound when they hit the ground. However, such a cold sound was unavoidably a little creepy in such an environment. Mu Yichen looked in the direction of the sound and saw a woman in a snow-white dress. She was walking slowly toward him through the thick black fog. "Mom," Xiao Yichen stared blankly at the voice and forced a smile. "Mommy." As the footsteps approached, Yun Shishir's tall and slender figure gradually came into view. "Mommy," Xiao Yichen sat up agitatedly. He couldn't stand up at all. With so many injuries, just sitting up took all his energy. Yun Shishir walked over and squatted beside him. Her eyes were filled with tenderness as she gazed at his face and gently caressed his cheek. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly, with a touch of soothing emotion. Little Yichen smiled and immediately replied, "It doesn't hurt, no?" Yun Shusher's gaze fell on the wounds on his body. She gently caressed his wounds with her slender hand and suddenly, she pressed her hand hard. Blood immediately gushed out. Ouch! Xiao Yichen arched his body in pain and broke out in cold sweat. Did it hurt? Yun Shusher smiled apologetically and immediately. She hugged him gently. Xiao Yichen, it doesn't hurt. It won't hurt anymore. Xiao Yichen smiled weakly. Mommy, it's okay. It doesn't hurt, but you've lost so much blood. Yun Shusher hugged him even tighter and said in a heartbroken tone, Xiao Yichen, it doesn't hurt anymore. I'll set you free. As soon as she finished speaking, Xiao Yichen felt another sharp pain piercing his heart. It was his vitals. Earlier, regardless of whether it was Yueyao or Yu, none of them had managed to stab his vitals. Only the dagger in Yun Shusher's hand had mercilessly pierced his heart. However, he could no longer feel the pain now. Chapter 36-46. Sob, 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 sob. He suddenly cried like a child, heartbroken and heartbroken. It didn't matter who it was, be it Yueyao or Yu. He wasn't afraid of anyone who hurt him. Why did it have to be her? Why did it have to be his beloved mommy? Why did she have to kill him? What did he do wrong? Xiao Yichen hugged Yun Shusher tightly and cried sadly. Why? Yun Shusher stared at him coldly. Xiao Yichen howled sadly. Why are you doing this to me? What did I do wrong? I'm Xiao Yichen. I'm your Xiao Yichen. What did I do wrong? Mommy, you can't do this to me, you can't. The door to the secret room slowly opened. Gong Xiaoying strode in and saw the white-robed man standing expressionlessly with a crystal ball in his hand. He silently looked at Xiao Yichen who was sitting on the chair. At that moment, Xiao Yichen was still immersed in his nightmare. He kept shaking his head as though he couldn't believe it. He muttered something under his breath. Gong Xiaoying listened carefully. He kept asking, why? He stood up straight and looked at the white-robed man. He asked calmly, how's the progress? Shoo, the white-robed man raised a finger, indicating for him to keep quiet. Gong Xiaoying controlled his temper and didn't say anything. The white-robed man said, I've already created the scariest illusion for him. He won't be able to escape once he enters this illusion. No matter how strong a person's willpower was, it would be difficult to turn the situation around. Moreover, he was just a child. Gong Xiaoying's lips curled into a smug smile. However, he suddenly noticed that Little Yichen's furrowed brows were gradually smoothed out. Even his lips were faintly arched. The white-robed man widened his eyes in surprise. What was going on? He seemed to be smiling. How could he smile so freely in such a dream? The white-robed man immediately raised the crystal ball and compared it to Mu Yichen's face. Through the crystal ball, he was able to peek into his dream. In the dream, it was still the same desolate scene. Xiao Yichen hugged Yun Shusher so tightly that it was as if he was afraid that she would disappear. Even Yun Shusher was flabbergasted. She didn't understand why he was still holding her so tightly when she hurt him like this. Xiao Yichen smiled, but tears continued to flow down his cheeks. When he opened his eyes,